across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yeah, good afternoon. Thank you to Julia. She's back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. The home of Common Sense continues. We will naturally be picking up on that huge result at the Supreme Court. Transgender women are not legally women. That was the verdict after years of debate. Has common sense finally prevailed here? I want your response on that. There's so many elements and tentacles to this one. We'll continue to take your calls. Also, Britain is negotiating a one-for-one migrant swap with France. Under the plan, illegal small boat arrivals will be traded for genuine asylum seekers with a real right to live here. Where do we even start with that one? We'll look at the detail later in the programme. And inflation has fallen to 2.6% thanks to lower fuel prices, but experts say it may not last, with the cost of living squeeze far from over. Some say it's only just re-beginning. We'll have full details. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Just imagine a conversation a handful of years ago. I don't know, you and some mates in a pub. There's going to be a court case that's going to define what a woman is. I mean, folk would have rightly assumed the world had gone stark raving mad. But welcome to the 21st century, kids, with all of its bonkers, bells and whistles. It's actually happened. An actual case with a buffet of judges deciding who has the right to call themselves a woman. The conclusion when it came was relatively swift. In legal terms, transgender women are not legally women, according to the Supreme Court, declared in this landmark ruling. Handing down the judgment, Lord Hodge said it was the court's unanimous view that the term woman and sex in the 2010 Equality Act referred to biological sex, not acquired gender. Gender-critical campaigners hailed Wednesday's ruling as a victory for common sense, claiming that self-ID is dead. On the other side of this argument, the Metro lecturers and the so-called good, great, and any old clown who can't digest a basic argument are currently discombobulating after the ruling. Their mangled logic has fallen apart. For most women, it should be said, this was never really about what you're against. It's about what you're for. It's want to retain the rights of women. It wasn't an anti-thing in that sense. It was what you are pro. And so many arguments are royally dismantled based on people not getting their head around that basic fact. It's not what you're against, it's what you are for. And this argument was never difficult. It was so straightforward. A 9-year-old could have got their heads around this. There's many elements to it, of course. Changing rooms, women's spaces and all the like, and there are obvious examples where things have gone wrong. Rapist Isla Bryson, real name Adam. Tiffany Scott, the sex offender, no longer with us, real name Andy. These are people that were either in or were going to be put in women's jails. They were blokes until they decided, oh, hang on, I might get a taste of prison, so I'll become a woman. We see quite a lot of that. Marxist identitarians are another group, the people that encourage kids and anyone else to be whoever you want. This is where the problem has started, and I know I'm going to go over a bit of old ground on this, but I've done phone-in radio for a couple of decades, more than 2 decades, and this literally never came up. It never, ever came up as an issue, and all of the time, whenever we would interview somebody, if they happened to be trans, we didn't refer to it. Again, the example I always give, when Nadia won Big Brother, a trans woman, nobody, if ever there was going to be a point where this would begin a debate, it might have been then. Nothing was really said about it. It was just Nadia who won Big Brother. It just wasn't there. And then it sort of crept almost out of nowhere. And the bit that I genuinely get angered by is when people who choose to live their life as a member of a different, the opposite sex to the one they were born. If you want to live your life like that, I don't give a hoot. You can, that's absolutely fine. But it wasn't that group that caused the problem, nor was it the people who are now referred to as TERFs, who flag correctly issues about women's space. It wasn't that group that caused the problem. It was the identitarian left that decided you can be whoever you want to be, and if you've got a beard and a penis and you want to walk into a woman's changing room, you should be allowed to by dint of just calling yourself a woman. It was that group. It was the gender evangelists. It wasn't trans people. Gender evangelists were the very group that said, you know, if you want to say you're a woman or any other invented gender on the unicorn spectrum, you should be recognised legally and otherwise in whatever form you like. And everything around you, language should change, rules should change, laws should change. You look at some of the characters that are calling themselves trans women. They're not trans women. There's a lot of transvestic fetishism going on there as well, sometimes called cross-dressing in the past, people struggling for an identity, mental health issues, and, of course, the politicised Marxist brigade, who really advanced this one as much as they could, and certain charities who had run out of things to campaign for, so decided this was clearly the best thing to do. It's that group of people that are the problem. This was always political. They caused a huge problem for a group of people that have never really found themselves under the spotlight before, and that is men and women who decide to live as the opposite sex to the one they were born with. It doesn't make them a woman, it doesn't make them a man, but if they want to live like that, call themselves a different, fine. We never discussed this before, never came up before. Was never on the agenda, not once. And you look at how contentious this has become, but it hasn't become contentious because of TERFs. It hasn't become contentious because of trans people. It's become contentious because of the identitarian sector of the political spectrum, the kind of hard left who have advanced this and had some success because it makes it sound like, oh, this is the new being gay. So, you know, you wouldn't have said that to a gay person, so why would you say it to a trans person? Sorry, the bloke with the beard is not, that's not a woman, OK? I think we can say that. And I remember talking to India Willoughby, who's a trans woman. India's been around for a long, long time, used to be a regular on the show, no longer talks to me, for some reason thinks I'm part of some cartel of evil, always supporting what India said. She turned up to give a speech at some kind of, I don't know, extravaganza or festival, I think it was in Trafalgar Square or something. And she was meant to be the second speaker on, and the first speaker stood up, went on stage and said something like, forgive the language here, but it's relevant, very relevant and in context, where a guy went on stage and said, I'm a trans woman and I have a dick. And that's what they said. And India said, I'm out of here, and went home. Because that's not what being trans is. That's not the whole point. You know, you're not meant to sort of celebrate, mess around with it, use it as an identity, a gimmick, what, blah, blah, blah. India has since very much done a full 360 and has very different views on that, would now probably be breaking bread with the person that she parted company with. But you take my point. So it's been that group of people that have really mucked it all up. 0344 499 1000. So this gender court ruling, has common sense prevailed? Let me ask you that to begin with. Has it prevailed? What is it? And there is a genuine question. People who decide to live their lives as a person of the opposite sex, what happens to that group? Because nobody wants to be unkind to people who've lived for years very quietly and unassumingly and bothered nobody. What's the deal there? Genuine question. 0344 499 1000. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Chloe Dobbs is back with us, political commentator. Chloe, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. So it was a Supreme Court ruling. It was long coming, but the verdict or the conclusion was reasonably swift in legal terms, that transgender women are not women. Let's have a listen. It's worth having a listen just to set the scene here a little bit to Lord Hodge, who headed up this case today, making the announcement.
The central question on this appeal is the meaning of the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010. Do those terms refer to biological women or biological sex? Or, is a woman to be interpreted as extending to a trans woman with a gender recognition certificate? By that I mean a person born male who now possesses a gender recognition certificate amending her gender to female. The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
So there it is, Chloe. Fairly straightforward stuff. I said at the beginning, you know, ultimately a 9-year-old could have got their head around this one, but it took the full might of the Supreme Court to make the conclusion, and it seems to be a victory. I know it's a bit of a cliche, a victory for common sense.
Absolutely a victory for common sense. Feels like sanity is restored. I feel a lot more hopeful today that, you know, we're turning the tide on all this wacky wokery that has caused, I think, a lot of danger to women. I think this is a fantastic day for women to finally have this clarified. The reality is, I mean, as you were saying a moment ago, Ian, that this talk of people being able to change their gender and a bloke in a frock being able to claim he's a woman, this is something that's actually very new only over the past few years. And when the Equality Act was written, they didn't really need to specify and be clear about what a woman was because it wasn't really a question up for debate. So this clarity was very much needed. It needed to be changed and clarified. So I'm happy that that has been done and the right decision has been made. I was nervous about this case because we have had so many stories recently, haven't we, of activist judges, particularly when it comes to deportations, making what I would consider very woke decisions. I very much have my concerns about some of the judges not acting in the way that they should do in their rulings. So this today, this is very much a win for women. Yeah. And well done to all of the women for Women's Scotland and all the other people who have been campaigning for common sense and other organisations like Sex Matters, for example, great campaigners, because these people have dealt with so much abuse, constantly called TERFs, transphobes. I mean, as you were saying a moment ago, Ian, that people often they try to lump it together, you know, all the different letters of the alphabet together to make it out as though it's the same as being gay, and that saying, questioning a bloke in a frock claiming to be a woman is the same as being homophobic. It really isn't. And people have received so much abuse and being called so many horrible names for arguing for this. But now that a ruling has been made by a court, I think they're very much vindicated now.
Spot on. And we are going to take more calls on this as well. Has common sense prevailed? 0344 499 1000. On to this story, Chloe, as well. Britain in talks with France over a one-to-one migrant swap. British officials are chatting to the French about this sort of one-out, one-in system for tackling illegal migration. So this is clearly a new approach from Keir Starmer. It's worth reminding us, by the way, of his old approach. I don't know how this one's going. Remember what he's been telling us for the last year or so? Let's have a reminder.
You will have helped to smash the gangs, secure our borders, and save countless lives. Smash the criminal gangs, and they are criminal gangs, that are running this vile trade and putting people in the boats. Take those gangs down. I think smashing the gangs that are taking people's money is a deterrent. I think you have to smash those gangs. The only way to stop that is to smash the gangs that are running this vile trade. Smash the gangs.
So what's happened? Clearly, Chloe, they've gone, oh, that's not really working that well, so we need another idea. Oh, here's a good one. Well, let's go for a one-in, one-out. So people who came over on boats with no idea who they are, they can go back to France. But reciprocally, France will then give us a good migrant, and that'll be great, won't it? Well, no is the answer initially to that, and no is the answer on second thoughts to that. So I'm not quite sure what room Keir Starmer is reading here.
Well, I think Keir Starmer is probably getting a little bit scared because we've just heard that we hit a new record for the number of migrants coming in a day, I believe. Over 700 migrants arriving in just one day. Many of our viewers and listeners will have been enjoying the sunny weather, but every time the sun comes out, as much as I enjoy it, the thing that is at the back of my mind is, well, there are going to be a lot of arrivals today in Dover, aren't there? And also we've had, this point in the year from the start of 1st of January, today, the number that we're up to, I think we're on about 9,000 migrants have arrived so far. That, I believe, is also on a new record. So the situation is actually getting worse. And, you know, Keir Starmer, he's seeing the polls, he's seeing how well Reform are doing, and he's thinking, gosh, I better do something. He was stupid to cancel the Rwanda deterrent on the day that he first came into office. You know, that was such a pain to get that up and running with all of the court battles and whatnot, but it was basically then ready to go. Why wouldn't you just stick with it and give it a go and just see if it works first? So now he ditched that and he's got to try something else. And, you know, I'll believe it when I see it. And at the moment, this is just talks with the French. But I'm happy for them to give it a go and see and experiment. But I really think that they need to have a lot more tenacity and deal with this with a much greater sense of urgency, because ultimately the Labour Party, they're going to lose the next general election if they don't sort this out.
Yeah, but I just can't imagine the French going, you know, you've got some fella who came over in a boat, don't know who he is, doesn't speak great English, doesn't speak great French, so we're not sure. So France are going to take him, and in return, we're going to give you the neurosurgeon Bob from Eritrea, because he's like clearly a guy you could do. I can't imagine that being the kind of the nuts and bolts of this arrangement somehow, Chloe. I see it being, you know, probably anything but straightforward.
I mean, I think that you're not going to be getting any neuroscientists and nurses and doctors and whatnot. But I think it could possibly do something in that, although in the short term, it would mean that the number coming in the country is the same because you're swapping one for one.
Yep.
If that then means for a migrant sitting in Calais or Dunkirk, they know, gosh, you're going to spend thousands and thousands to get on this boat and all they're going to do is ship me back afterwards, then that could potentially be a good deterrent. But I really don't trust the French. Okay, we've seen videos recently of them basically helping all the migrants get on the boats. You've got the police boat just sitting in the water, just watching, just make sure they get on safely on their way to Britain, not intervening in any way whatsoever. They just take our cash and they pocket it. So what I imagine will happen here is, if this does go ahead, they'll ask for a big sum of money for it, and then they'll put it in their pockets and not behave themselves. They'll probably send us the worst migrants, I expect, the ones that they don't want to deal with.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what, in fact, let's not speculate, that is exactly what will happen on this arrangement. I mean, the optics of it are terrible, because this isn't about reducing immigration. This is Keir Starmer saying, we're fine about the numbers. It's just like we're going to try and maybe get some people who could contribute more. This is a mess, and it compounds itself, and Keir Starmer is walking the plank to a massive loss if he keeps up this level of ineptitude. Listen, Chloe, stay with us. We'll speak some more in a couple of moments' time. Lots more to come right here on the programme. 0344 499 1000. What are you making of that arrangement with France? A one-for-one exchange of migrants so we get better quality people coming here. Is that really what the issue is? Is that the issue? Is it the amounts of people? Is it social cohesion that I think are quite big on the list here? The trans ruling as well. Want to get some more response on that too. Although Mike in Gloucester says, please, 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 no more talk of the Supreme Court decision. Mike, it only happened half an hour ago, mate. There's about 3 days worth of talk in this one. But I get it. We'll talk about lots of things on the programme this afternoon. Is it a victory for common sense in terms of the trans issue? What happens to trans people now? Where would somebody... Well, let me put the question like this. If you are a man, born a man, but have lived life as a female, you're not a woman, but you've lived life as a female, you look like a female, you've had surgical procedures, you've gone through all of that, nobody would know, put it that way. Let's say nobody would tell the difference. Where does that person change when it comes to going to a swimming pool or a gym? Where would that person change in a swimming pool or a gym? Because that is still left kind of hanging here. 0344 499 1000. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
We've both done our weekly check. Apparently, we still haven't grown our penis. I don't know if you want to do your check and see whether you've grown yours or not, but what's your message to the Prime Minister, who apparently thinks that some of us have penises?
Well, I would just echo the message of the highest court in the land and the top judges in the land. And by the way, there were two women, Lady Simler and Lady Rose, on that panel, and they were both there today. The judgment was read, the two judgments on two cases were read by the President and Vice President, but the two lady judges were there too. It doesn't really matter what the Prime Minister thinks about this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 24 minutes after 1 o'clock. Chloe Dobbs is with us, the political commentator, taking a look over the big stories of the day, of which there are many, including China gaining access to NHS medical records from 500,000 patients. I mean, Chloe, you don't need to know a lot about sort of international affairs to realise this is all shades of wrong, potentially dangerous. What the hell is going on?
Well, I mean, I can't claim to be an expert, but MI5, I would like to think, are experts as to how dangerous China having our data is. And they have said that this is a stupid idea and this is a danger to our national security to be handing swathes of patient data to China. Now, my understanding is that the reason why this data is being made available to the Chinese is because certain parts of our data are available to, for example, to university researchers, for example, to be able to use that in their studies. But the reality is that there are a heck of a lot of Chinese students studying in the UK. The universities here absolutely love it because they pay them way higher fees than the UK students. And apparently 1 in 5 of the people who are requesting access to this system that has patient data on it are Chinese. And that system can potentially be abused. I mean, I think that the Chinese already have a scary amount of our data just with TikTok. Anyone who's actually read the disclaimer before they've accepted it when they've downloaded the TikTok app knows it's pretty scary, and they're constantly asking, can I have permission to have this, all your contacts and everything from your phone. I think it's clear that the Chinese would absolutely love to have our data. Whether this would be abused or not, we don't know for sure. I'm sure there would be some Chinese researchers that genuinely are using it for proper studies, but it very much is open to abuse. And I think patients will be very wary of knowing that this is where their data could be going.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot. I mean, it's 500,000 people. It's not an insignificant amount. GP records, genomes, tissue samples as well could be there. I mean, it's extraordinary. Disastrous area, particularly when we know about the sort of precarious nature of the West's relationship with China. We will wait and see where it goes. Inflation is down, Chloe. It's always good news when that happens, although the smart money says it's likely to rise to around about 3 or 3.6% by sort of summertime.
Yeah, so we've seen inflation drop a little bit, significantly in part to the fact that petrol prices have come down a bit, but Rachel Reeves and Starmer really shouldn't be too excited about this, because I know every little stat that they get that seems to be in their favour, they make a huge thing about it and put up a load of social media posts about it to try and drown out all the bad news that there is about what Labour is doing. But I don't think they should toot their trumpet too much about this, because I expect it's going to start going up again. We've had April is, they tried to make it sound like we're all going to be 500 quid richer, but people, they're calling it awful April now, because all the bills are about to go up. I mean, pretty much every bill you can think of is about to go up, both for normal households and for businesses 100%. And employers when it comes to national insurance and all the rest of it. And not to mention the fact that businesses, not only do they have huge wage cost bills right now, but they've also got huge energy costs as well, which means that inevitably prices are going to be passed on to consumers. So I really don't think that people are going to be feeling much better off anytime soon under Labour.
Indeed. This one as well. Lords plot rebellion over Angela Rayner's crackdown on free speech in pubs. This is, of course, the Employment Rights Bill, fearing it could restrict free speech. Lord Young, Toby Young, of course, proposed amendments to exclude venues like pubs and sports grounds from monitoring conversations that might offend staff. And this is what it's sort of all been about. I mean, what happens in the minds of somebody like Rayner and her cohort of numpties that sit around and say, here's a good idea, why don't we come up with a scheme that, you know, if somebody's offended in the workplace, then it breaches their contract or something. I mean, I don't know why you need to go there. There's always going to be obvious examples, and we have laws in place as well that could deal with that. If someone was, you know, being particularly sexist or homophobic, then that is already an existing breach of general workplace rules and often rules of the land. But the idea that you're going to extend this to pubs, where if somebody working behind the bar might hear you say a bad word or tell an off-colour joke, that you're going to, you know, the pub is therefore taken to court because a punter said something, not because the boss said something. This is all shades of bizarre, isn't it?
This is bizarre. Absolutely, I think it is a stupid idea to essentially have banter police in pubs. Now, as you said, there are places where some people might be saying something inappropriate in a pub. I've worked in pubs plenty, and yeah, there are cases where someone has had a few too many and they're being inappropriate. You know, as a woman working behind the bar, you get the odd comments, and sometimes it gets a bit inappropriate if the customers had too much. But then you can say to your boss, you know, can you maybe kick this guy out? He's being a bit inappropriate. But to extend that to, oh, I heard someone on that table, some bloke said that there are only two genders. Can we call up the police because this is transphobia? I mean, that is just genuinely beyond belief. And once you lose your free speech, you're not going to get it back, right? Nope. So we have to fight to the death for this. And I really, really hope that Toby Young is successful with this rebellion that he is trying to stage, because we will be in very dangerous territory with free speech if this happens. And the pub, you know, that's just such a, you know, crucial part of British culture, and people love the fact that you can go down there and you can just chat about whatever you like without feeling like you're being listened to by the thought police.
Spot on. We'll have to be quick with this one, but we know that on Monday the Spice Girls reformed and went up in a rocket. Katy Perry was among those that took this big trip for sisterhood, being referred to, by the way, as astronauts. I don't think so. Not even crew. You know, some very rich, privileged passengers, maybe. Let's have a reminder, though. I mean, if you think this is not life-changing to do it, let's have a reminder of what Katy Perry said when she landed.
What you're doing is you're like really finding the love for yourself, because you got to trust in yourself on this journey. And then you're feeling the love when you come down, for sure. And you're feeling that strength. So I feel really connected to that strong, divine feminine right now.
Yeah, that's professional half-wit Katy Perry speaking on landing. But of course, this story, Chloe, has taken a bit of a twist, because she didn't land, because she didn't take off in the first place. In fact, the whole thing was fake. There's a huge online meme and various other debates going that it never actually happened, and like all conspiracy theories, they've listed the reasons why it was invented. Apparently the door can only be opened from the outside, and yet it appeared to be that somebody tried to open it from the inside when it landed, and they had to quickly go, oh, no, that wasn't meant to happen, and the state of the craft didn't... I mean, let's just get one thing straight. Katy Perry didn't walk on the moon, for God's sake. She was there literally in what's called technically space for about 39 seconds and then came back again. It wasn't like a big rocket. Neil Armstrong wasn't there. Buzz Aldrin wasn't on the corner giving some directions. Oh, just turn left at Saturn. There was none of that happening. This was a glorified aeroplane trip, if you like, but in a capsule. But now, apparently, bad news. Didn't happen. It was all fake.
Look, anything like this, there are going to be conspiracy theorists, right? I mean, we've still got people arguing over whether we ever actually went to the moon or not. And I don't know if the theories are true or not. With AI imaging so good these days, you know, that very much opens a void to people saying, oh, that's definitely all AI. I don't know. But at the end of the day, whether they went there or not, this is not something that warrants them the Nobel Peace Prize. They went on a fun ride and they were only there for, I mean, I heard 4 minutes, you've heard 39 seconds, however long it is, it's not very impressive.
Not at all. Listen, great to have you on with us as ever, Chloe. Thank you, Chloe Dobbs, political commentator with us on the programme. Your response to any of those stories, the one-for-one migrant exchange with France, how'd you feel about that? As a Brit, looking at out-of-control immigration in this country, what is your take on that? And the question from the Supreme Court, the gender ruling this morning, has common sense prevailed? Genuinely asking this on behalf of people who choose to live their life differently. Where do those people go now? I mean, you cannot really say, I am a woman, legally, if you're not, because the court has ruled that isn't the case. A transgender person can't declare themselves a woman because they are not. So that all makes sense, that's common sense. But where does somebody who lives as a trans person, where do they go in a changing room? I know that's always the litmus test of this. It's a genuine question for me. Does that person just go in the changing room of their born sex? Because I can also see a lot of problems with that as well. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to Margaret in Edinburgh firstly for your kind comments. She says you're spot on about the trans women debate. It's about women's rights and it's lefty idealism that distorts the issue. Thank you, Margaret, for that. We will talk to Peter Tatchell on this point in a moment. David says, afternoon, I bet when they wrote the Equality Act, they never thought defining what a woman is would ever come up, says David in the Cotswold. Well, you would have thought that the world had gone mad if somebody had said to you, even 10 years ago, oh, did you know there's going to be a court case? Oh, what's it about? What, bank robbery or something? No. Libel? No. They're going to define what a woman is. Really? Get out of here. What do you mean they're going to do? They need a court case to define what a woman is? And that's what happened today. The court said, look, it's not a victory for one side or the other, or shouldn't be seen in that kind of way. But they did conclude, and there's no doubt about this, this was the ruling, transgender women are not legally women under UK law. The ruling defines women based on biological sex, not gender identity or self-ID. And of course, this follows the battle between For Women's Scotland and the Scottish Government, with campaigners calling it a victory for common sense. In a moment, we'll be speaking to Peter Tatchell. Bev Jackson's going to be with us too, but let's have a reminder of Lord Hodge this morning delivering the verdict.
The central question on this appeal is the meaning of the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010. Do those terms refer to biological women or biological sex? Or is a woman to be interpreted as extending to a trans woman with a gender recognition certificate? By that I mean a person born male who now possesses a gender recognition certificate amending her gender to female. The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
Let's first speak with Bev Jackson, co-founder of the LGB Alliance. Afternoon to you, Bev. Your reaction to this ruling this morning?
Yeah, lovely to see you, Ian, and thanks for having me on. And obviously, we're just incredibly pleased with this decision. And I really want to pay tribute to For Women Scotland, who have fought and fought and fought for years. They're all volunteers. They've just been fighting because it's so important for the women of Scotland, for the women of the UK, and I think that this will reverberate around the world. But we intervened, LGB Alliance and a number of lesbian groups, because of the rights of lesbians, which are constantly overlooked. And I think you'll find that all the articles about this coming up, they ignored the fact of lesbian rights. But it was really important when we saw in the court these judges grappling with the absurdity that a straight man, a heterosexual man who does not possess a gender recognition certificate is a heterosexual man, but once he's got that piece of paper, he becomes a lesbian. And you could see the judges thinking, this makes no sense. And that's why throughout their ruling, they talk about a coherent interpretation of the law. The law has to make sense. And sexual orientation, whether you're attracted to men or to women, is about biology. It's about biological sex. Of course it is. It isn't. Nobody's attracted to a piece of paper. It was a complete nonsense. And although I understand the Supreme Court saying that it isn't a victory, it is, of course, a victory for those whose rights have been ignored. This is not about trans rights. It's about women's rights and it's about lesbian rights, which is a sort of double of women's rights, isn't it? It's about women defining themselves and who we're attracted to.
And it did seem, I went through this at the beginning, and I talked, you and I, Bev, have spoken many times over the years on this issue, but what's to me still confusing, this was not an issue up until about half an hour ago, it seems. I've done this job for a couple of decades. You've worked in your field of campaigning and profile for a long, long time too. It never came up. It just never came up. It only really came up, I sense, was when not trans people who decide to live their life under a different name and a different sex from the one they were born with, who weren't harming anybody, weren't advocating any special treatment, etc. It seemed to be this kind of gender evangelism that threw it up. As you rightly say, a bloke with a beard suddenly says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a lesbian. Now, sorry, no, that ain't happening, mate. And it was things like that and various, fairly high-profile people sometimes saying you can be whatever you want to be. And if you've got a beard and a penis and want to call yourself a woman, you have the right to do so, and the law of the land and all institutions should change to accommodate your identity.
Yes, well, I mean, you've got Peter Tatchell coming on in a minute, and he's going to talk about the rights of people who call themselves the opposite sex. But the fact is that lesbians' rights have been ignored throughout, and that is why Kate Harris and I set up LGB Alliance. Really, it was the main reason in 2019. We tried to get Stonewall to understand that when they changed from talking about the rights of gays and lesbians, same sex, to talking about the rights of people who think they're the opposite sex, same gender, they were making a nonsense of sexual orientation. Sexual orientation isn't about gender, someone who thinks they're the opposite sex. That's not what sexual orientation is. It's completely mad. And in fact, if you ask heterosexual people, if if a man who's heterosexual falls for a woman because it's a man but who calls themselves a woman, they will think it's ridiculous because straight people don't have to deal with that. It's lesbians mostly who've had to deal with this, and we're really sick and tired of it. And that is why I feel really, I think you can hear it in my voice, I feel really emotional about this. We have been fighting this for so long. We have been ignored, we have been invisible, and it's really a tremendous, it's above all, it's a relief to see that the Supreme Court understood, and they said that for lesbians to have to accept men who call themselves lesbians into their spaces and into their activities is an assault on their autonomy and dignity. And it was such a relief to read those words, I can't tell you.
I tell you, and it got to really weird sort of areas, didn't it? I think, again, we talked about this before. If I decided that I was a woman, but I wasn't a straight woman, I was a lesbian, and you decided, Bev, that you would never date me, then that would make you a wicked transphobe, despite the fact that my anatomical makeup remains that of a male. You would be transphobic for not you wouldn't have to date me, but for not recognising that I was dateable. That would make you the bad person.
From how difficult it is for you to even express that it is not,
Yes.
It's incoherent, isn't it? It makes no sense. And yet that is what Stonewall has been telling us. That is what, ever since 2015, when they changed from same sex to same gender, that is what Stonewall has been telling us. And that is what all the LGBTQIA plus organizations around the world have been telling us. And that's why I really hope that this is a victory for what is sometimes called Turf Island, sometimes affectionately and sometimes as an insult. I'm really pleased that news media around the world, in France and in America, around the world, are taking note of this, because this needs to be rowed back everywhere, not just in the UK. And all tribute to For Women Scotland for fighting this fight and allowing us to intervene on behalf of lesbian rights.
Bev, thank you. Always a pleasure to have you on. Bev Jackson, co-founder of the LGB Alliance. Let's talk to Peter Tatchell, human rights activist, director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. Peter, good afternoon to you. Well, I think you've probably been listening to what Bev said. I'm going to take a bit of a punt here that there's quite a lot you would disagree with. Good afternoon.
Well, good afternoon, Ian and listeners. First of all, let me start by saying that biological sex is real, and so is gender identity. They're two different things. They're not the same, but they're both equally valid. And in a democratic liberal society, we have to try and find a way of reconciling them to avoid some of the instances that Bev has spoken about. As far as I'm aware, there's never been any court judgment in this country to compel a lesbian to have sex with a trans woman or to date a trans woman. That is, and I'm sure there have been a few examples where a trans woman has tried to date a lesbian, but of course, a lesbian is perfectly within her rights to refuse to date a trans
But it doesn't
woman.
make you, I think the point there with Bev was that it doesn't make you a wicked transphobe if you say, well, I'm never ever going to, like, I'm never going to date a trans woman. That's not going to happen. And I can say that. I can say that without being a transphobic son of a gun, can't I?
Absolutely. I have never supported those who say that lesbians must date trans women. That is completely wrong.
Okay.
Lesbians have every right to refuse to date a person of any kind. No one should be forced to date anyone.
True.
And I think this is a bit of a mountain out of a molehill, because, as I say, the courts have never ruled that lesbians must date trans women, and all the lesbians I know, when they've been approached by trans women, they've politely said no, thank you, and the trans woman has accepted that and said okay. So it's a bit of a mountain out of a molehill. But on the wider issue, this judgment, my understanding is that it will not prevent organizations from choosing to accept trans women if they wish to. So, for example, I have a friend who works for a women's centre in the north of England. For the last, I think, 7 years now, by the agreement of the staff and the users, they have accepted trans women, and they've never had a problem. It's a happy centre where everybody is welcome and it's trans inclusive. The law won't force them to deny trans women, providing no one objects. But of course, if someone does object, then the centre told me they would have to change their policy.
And there's clearly always going to be people with different views. You know, we're a healthy democracy, Peter, and, you know, not everybody is always on the same page with every sinew of a judgment. But broadly speaking, something like a woman's refuge, there would be, you might imagine, you know, a lot of people would say, hang on, this is for women, not for blokes. And of course, this judgment does very much say that a trans woman is not a woman.
But
therefore a bloke.
It also says now that trans men must use women's toilets. And that's going to cause incredible distress to women when they go to a toilet thinking it's for them, and suddenly a trans man walks in. Imagine the shock, discomfort, and fear that some of those women might feel.
Yeah, I genuinely asked that. Yeah, I genuinely asked that question because I was never, I've never been able to work that out. And just to go over what I said a little earlier, Peter, I've done this job for a long time, as you know, and this was never ever a debate. It was never a discussion. It wasn't on the agenda. It suddenly appeared out of nowhere, it seems. And I've often wondered where or how it came around. And it seems to me that, yes, of course, there are trans people who will have felt discriminated against over the years, but this has been a political thing, hasn't it? This hasn't really come from people who genuinely feel, I'm in the wrong body, I need to live my life differently. This has come from, the identitarian Marxist left, if you like, who've gone in hard on this. You can be whoever you want to be. You want to call yourself, if you've got a penis and a beard and you want to call yourself a woman, you've got every right to do that, and the rest of the world should bend over backwards to accommodate it.
No, that's not true or fair, Ian. The call for trans inclusion has come from trans people themselves who've been marginalised and discriminated against, and that is wrong. This judgment, of course, also says that trans people will continue to be protected under the Equality Act against discrimination, but it will allow, in certain circumstances, same-sex, women-only spaces to be preserved. Now, it's a difficult issue. The other issue, of course, is when it comes to biology isn't simple. A trans woman who undertakes hormone treatment and gender reassignment will have many of the attributes of a biological woman. The hormone treatment will actually change their physiology.
But she'll never be a biological woman, though, will she?
It will change their, reduce their muscle mass, reduce their strength.
Would it change their chromosomes, Peter?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It won't change their chromosomes.
So they remain a man.
Biology is not a simply, black and white, cut and dried issue. It is complex, and unfortunately, we're in a situation where this judgment has ruled in one direction, and that will mean for many trans people a great deal of anxiety. I think and hope that most organisations will respond in a measured way, and will, perhaps we can find new solutions. For example, on the issue of toilets, if we have more gender-neutral toilets, like you have at a pop concert or a festival, the toilets there, they're not male and female, they're gender-neutral. Well, more institutions could have gender-neutral toilets, and that might solve that problem. And then in terms of trans participation or involvement or attendance or ability to access women-only spaces, perhaps some organisations might now make new trans-inclusive spaces available for trans people.
That would be
separate is not equal, separate is not desirable, but that may be a solution.
Okay, well, people have their own views on where you draw a line, as in things like participating in sport, etc. But that maybe is an argument for another day. Meantime, Peter, thank you. Peter Tatchell, he is, of course, human rights activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. I don't think the argument from women is that you don't need to start investigating what other, this is about, it's what you're for, not what you're against. And a woman-only space, if that's a refuge, if it's an area like a changing room, all those obvious places, I don't think it's too much to ask that a woman with lived experience only as a woman should be entitled to say that there is something about that requires a space for women, not people who identify as women. I do get the question, I'm royally confused, what do you do with a group of people who do look like a man or a woman but were never born that sex? Thoughts on that as well? 0344 499 1000.
we win the next general election, we will go to war with the leadership of the National Education Union. They are a clear and present danger to, frankly, to the education of children. Let's remember, teachers are there to teach children and youngsters how to think, not what to think. And I think it's a completely inappropriate thing to instruct teachers how to instruct children to think with regard to issues of current affairs and politics.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Sir Stanley says, why is it that Ian always seems to have Peter Tatchell on his show? I don't think Peter Tatchell's been on our show for about 2.5 years. Seriously, Stan. Nonetheless, we are hot on we've run slightly over, so we've got the news coming out. Let me do a couple of messages that have come in from you. We've been rammed on this one. Oh, by the way, we will take calls also on the one in, one out Keir Starmer migration proposal. I'll bring you some comment on that as well. Alan referenced that Supreme Court ruling, says the ruling brings common sense at last to the forefront. Your point of what happens to the trans community now with changing rooms. Surely we should move for trans to have their own safe spaces. Well, if some of those communities and organisations who've put squillions of quid into campaigning for, sort of equal rights rather than different rights, or whatever you want to call it, if they'd have put the same effort into getting, someone to build a new bog, then that might have solved the problem. Caroline says, you asked the question about which changing rooms trans women should use. Genuinely, trans women don't need to deny that they are biologically male. You can be a trans woman and accept that you are biologically a man. The Supreme Court made it clear that all required protections are in place for trans people, as being trans is a protected characteristic. A trans woman should use the men's changing room and shouldn't have a problem with that. The issue, I suppose, could be the reactions from other men. Well, I mean, that issue could be massive. So if somebody has breasts surgically produced, okay, long, for stereotypical purposes, long flowing blonde hair, very svelte figure, looks exactly like a woman, is she or he, depending on what your position is, meant to walk into a bloke's changing room? And think of it the other way round, because we don't often talk about trans men. I think it's Cher, whose now son, was daughter, who looks every bit the buff male. So a buff male with muscles and biceps and all that going on should be able to change in the female changing room, because that's what that would mean. Now, I don't know the answer to that. I genuinely don't know the answer to that. I can only think that up until now, those situations have probably been few and far between. But when they had happened, nobody had noticed and nobody said anything, because this was not a hysterical argument back then. Everyone just got on with it. But what is the answer? Because I do think I think the sort of sexual assault in the changing room is a little bit of a red herring on all of this, and I'm perfectly honest. I don't think that's commonplace, but it is a risk. And as Julia said today, you don't know where that risk would come from. But it's not, let's assume that never happens, all right? Let's just assume that. There is surely a world of difference between, it doesn't change the biology, and it doesn't, as we now know, change the gender, but someone who has gone through years of counselling, any surgery that might come alongside that, not everybody go for top and bottom surgery. Let's assume they do, because plenty do. So they look like a woman, sound like a woman. Nobody would ever know any difference, and they've lived their lives for 20 years as a woman. That person, as distinct from some Marxist them, who just with a beard and tats and God knows what else, who suddenly goes, yeah, I'm a woman. I want to be a woman because I was saying I'm a woman. So I should be able to use the change rooms. There's got to be a difference between those two people, right? I'm 100% sure there is. The newfangled fashion of getting kids to refer to themselves as non-binary because they're either a bit confused or they don't fancy conform. Used to be goths. Now non-binary seems to have overtaken things. Those kind of no, they can't use anything. But there is a genuine debate there. 0344 499 1000. More comment from you after the news at 2 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of common sense. Lots to get through, as you've been hearing. Transgender women are not legally women. That is the verdict from the Supreme Court. It's a landmark ruling after years of debate. Has common sense prevailed? What are your views on the kind of, well, there's a lot of tentacles to this discussion. Thoughts on what you've been hearing so far and your opinions too. Meanwhile, Reform UK is a far-right racist party led by a pound shop Donald Trump, according to Britain's top teaching union. We'll speak to one voice a little later who agrees with all of that. And an increasing number of properties are being sold by landlords ahead of the Renters' Rights Bill. That's according to new data. Paul Champlina, who's our man who regularly helps us out with property issues, joins us to chat all things real estate and property related. If you've got a question you want to put to Paul about landlords, tenants and all that's associated with property, he's with us a little later in the show. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Mark in Oxfordshire says, I fully support the Supreme Court ruling today and what it should mean for the trans-identified people. I also know a man who transitioned to a woman 3 decades ago. He's had full surgery and you wouldn't have a clue he wasn't a woman. People like this should carry on as they always have done. That isn't an issue. We all know who we want kept out of women's spaces, and today's ruling, hopefully, will sort that situation. Thank you to Mark in Oxfordshire, which is the point that I think anyone would be confused about that. What do you do? Either trans men never seem to really get discussed in this this debate. It's usually about trans women, but there's enough trans men that are more. You look at me, okay, someone like me physically, I'm pretty tasty on the eye, all right, you know, and in my trunks, it just keeps on getting better, I can promise you. However, there are some, Kevin Schofield's with us, he's just giggling at me now. This is just turned into mockery, Kev. But there are trans males out there that look probably, in terms of buff bodies, in a far greater part of the buff spectrum than me or Kevin, for that matter.
Certainly me.
Are we saying that those men, as they identify as, they should use the women's changing rooms? Because that would be really weird, as they walk in with a beard and biceps and muscles in places most people haven't got places. That would be a bit strange as well. So I don't know what against this ruling, I don't know what the answer is supposed to be.
Well, you know, I think that this won't be the end of it, basically, as I think we've got to acknowledge. This is obviously a very significant ruling. It's caused debate, political debate, in a way that few things have, really heated debate, in a way that few things have over the last maybe 5-10 years. But yeah, this won't be the end of it. And it closes maybe one chapter of it in terms of the legal definition, but politically, I don't think it's going to go away as an issue. Yeah,
you know, you've been in journalism a long time. I know, you know, largely political journalism. Did you have a dalliance as a TV critic at one point? No, that was Kevin O'Sullivan, wasn't it?
Definitely not me.
I did know that. But you know, we were just saying during the news there, this never came up. I mean, 20 years I've been doing phone-in shows. It never. I can promise you, I don't remember one occasion in that 20 years where we discussed any of this. And then suddenly, a few years ago, almost out of nowhere, we found ourselves discussing this.
Yeah, I think, as I said to you earlier, I think it's once politicians got involved in the debate, once it became a political issue, you're right, I think socially it wasn't an issue, you know, years ago. You're right, it wasn't a political issue. But once the politicians tried to put these definitions in statute, I mean, what is almost forgotten is that the thing that culminated today began many years ago with the Scottish Government trying to introduce quotas of gender quotas on public bodies, so there was an equal amount of men and women on these bodies. But in order to do that, they decided, well, you have to define what a woman is, and that's what triggered it. So you could say maybe that is where it all began. And once politicians got involved.
Yeah, I think there was also something else as well, Kevin. If you look at a lot of charities, Stonewall and people like that did amazing work with gay rights, and then suddenly realised, oh, we haven't got anything to do anymore. I think there was a little bit of that. We've got to find a new area. And that sort of chimed in the kind of modern world we're living in, where anyone can identify as anything, they can pick their own pronouns, they can do all of this. And I think that sort of threw up a whole array of other issues, like people going to jail and saying, oh, I'm going to jail, I'll identify as a woman halfway through a court case. I'm not really trans, but I'm just going to say I am. There's people that it used to just be called cross-dressers, who were quite happy at a weekend to stick a pair of pants and suspenders on. Enough about the press gallery. But yes, and then, you know, suddenly now are saying, well, no, actually, no, I've got the rights to call myself a woman. I'm a woman at least half the week, so I should have the same rights as all. So there's all of that I think got thrown into this at the same time.
Yeah, and I think you throw in social media as well. I think a lot of this
social media fueled the whole thing. 100%.
Social media is almost designed to divide people into camps.
Yes.
You're either 100% this way, 100% that way, and there's very little middle ground. This debate is one of many, actually, on social media where you see it really played out in real time.
100%. Let's move to this one. Reform UK is a far-right racist party, says the largest teaching union. This is the National Education Union, who's labelled Reform as far-right and racist, pledging funds to oppose its candidates at elections. At the annual conference, the General Secretary, Daniel Kabibi, criticised Reform's policies and described Nigel Farage as a pound shop Donald Trump. I mean, I always thought, if you're very left-wing, then you know, probably the Green Party look right-wing to you. You know, there's that problem as well with this. But I thought we'd kind of got over that thing of, you know, here's a party that, yes, they're a right-wing party, like you get left-wing parties, but because we disagree with them, we're going to call them all racist. I thought we got over that.
Yeah, again, apparently not. And again, social media, you know, this type of stuff just flies on social media. I think this is just water off a duck's back to Nigel Farage.
He won't care.
He will lap that up, because in a way it gives them something to divine themselves against.
100%.
They'll say, well, if these people, these left-wing teaching unions, hate us, we can't be all bad. I mean, he got asked about this yesterday, actually, up in Durham at a press conference, and he was like, I've got nothing against the trade union movement. In fact, they're trying to woo the trade union movement actually as a way of winning over Labour voters. But he says the teaching unions should not be focusing on standards in classrooms rather than politics. And I think a lot of people will probably think, you know what, you might have a point. So I think when you're attacking them like that, in a way it's kind of counterproductive. Funnily enough, I was speaking, just before I came in here, I was speaking to a Labour person and I was saying, how are Labour going to handle Farage? And he was saying, well, definitely what we shouldn't be doing is going after him on being far right, a racist, anything like that, because that just does not work. That's not an effective way of attacking him, and I think this might backfire
and
as well.
it could backfire as well. And of course, you know, people come into reform in the same way as the Brexit from all parts of the political spectrum. And I told this story last year. I was having some plastering done at home, and I said to the fellow who was plastering the wall, you know, how's it all going? And he went, yeah, right. I said, how long have you done this for? He said, I don't know, about 15 years. Hopefully I'm going to change career soon. And I said, oh, what are you thinking? He said, I'm the official parliamentary candidate for the Reform Party for Dagenham. And I went, really? And he went, yeah. And,
wow.
and I said, how? So I started talking to him about how he got there. This guy was a left-winger. He was Tony Benn type, Dennis Skinner kind of left-winger.
Right.
So these guys were not Remainers. They were pro-Brexit.
Sound like Tories.
So absolutely. But it's the horseshoe thing, isn't it? He was in that sort of part of the spectrum. And he loved what reform stood for. And so when a union speaks up like that, maybe not, the teachers' union is not the best example of this, but, you know, there's a lot of union members who will be supporting reform.
Oh no, there will be, and there will be a lot of, you know, that working class vote that Labour used to be able to rely on, lost them over Brexit, lost them to the Tories in 2019, won them back because people were so sick of the Tories last year. But you know, they're in the mix and they're certainly there, and you know, as I say, up for, you know, taking them on as far as the reform are concerned. So no, it doesn't surprise me, because a lot of people don't see themselves in the right wing, left wing spectrum. They just think, well, I quite like this party, and Labour have let me down, the Tories have let me down, why don't we give this other guy a shout? And to be fair to Nigel Farage as well, when you call him far right, he's been very, very consistent on Tommy Robinson, for instance. You know, absolutely has got no time for Tommy Robinson, a guy who is undeniably far right. So again, it gives Farage an opportunity to come back and say, well, you can't call me that. You know, I've been very strict. We've kicked out racists out the party. Candidates have got through vetting. We've kicked them out. People have said, you've got to get Tommy Robinson on board. I want nothing to do with them. So it allows him to then put forward that message which people can board,
I mean, these are kind of extraordinary times. I have to say, sometimes I do worry for my fellow voter out there, though, because I wonder if you live in one of those constituencies, how you went from being Tory to Labour and then Reform. I mean, I can get the kind of Tory to Reform, but what was the Labour bit in the middle that you thought, hang on, this Tory stuff isn't working with immigration, I'm going to get Keir Starmer or Angela Rayner into a job, because they'll sort it.
Well, yeah, but that was, I mean, that's, I guess, by the nature of our voting system as well. It's like, well, I think the main priority for people last July, as we saw, was just to vote to get rid of the Tories. And if that meant voting Labour,
anyone but the Tories.
If it was Lib Dems, I vote Lib Dems. And obviously Reform got 5 MPs elected as well. It was just all to get rid of the Tories. So it's not as if they are in the Labour camp in perpetuity, which makes the next set of elections, I think, very interesting indeed.
Absolutely. It's funny, you just mentioned Tommy Robinson. He just lost his appeal, as you will have seen.
Contempt of court.
He lost an appeal against his 18-month prison sentence for contempt. He'd previously lost a case as well about how he was kept in jail. I keep saying he's not in solitary confinement, he's in segregation.
Right.
And he has quite a lot of privileges, but probably more so than most prisoners. But the argument was you still don't really see anyone else apart from a few prison officers, and that does you nutting. He lost that, and now he's lost this one. And depending on where people sit on the spectrum, depends on how they view these kind of stories. He didn't get the maximum sentence for contempt either. He could have got twice that for contempt of court, and rightly or right. I've always thought contempt cases they've always carried long sentences, haven't they? They've always. I mean, I know there's some examples where you might get a month.
And as journalists, we're very much aware of the dangers of contempt of court.
100%.
You've got to be so careful.
Yeah, and you know they really can throw the book at you on a contempt case because ultimately you are going against the court, and they don't like, never go against the Inland Revenue or the court because you will lose every single time.
Every single time.
Every
and they
single
have
time.
A lot of power, as you say, to people for a very long time to make an example of you if they want. So,
exactly. Yeah, and I've been, I used to do a bit of court reporting, and I remember, when somebody has gone a bit nuts in the public gallery and started shouting out, that person can be jailed there and then, of course, by the judge, literally at that moment. And there was one case where somebody was, carted out. It was a really boring court case, so thank God for that person.
Give you a story.
It gave us a story, and it was like the most interesting thing that happened. I think I'm right in saying we couldn't report on it, because after the judge said, you will not report on that. And of course, when a judge says that,
because you don't want to be in contempt of court.
You'd be in contempt of court. So I'd be doing 18 months for that. Maybe not in segregation, though. Let's have a look at this story as well. This is a new scheme that Keir Starmer is a bit like Roadrunner when it comes to migration. He's coming up with different plans, and that one hasn't worked.
Yeah.
He was going to talk to the French and have a chat with Macron like nobody had tried that. Then he thought, I know what I'll do. I'll smash the gangs, which is already a criminal offence, and it's organised crime. Yeah. That hasn't really worked out. So now he's going for this sort of one in, one out option. British officials are discussing one-for-one migrant swap with France, deporting one migrant for each one accepted. Now, the bit I can't get my head around here, Kevin, is that it seems to me what we're meant to be, what Keir Starmer would want to happen. And you go, look, here's some people who arrived, across the channel in the dinghies. We don't know anything about them. They don't speak a lot of English or a lot of French, so perhaps not the people we ideally want here. So they can go to France, and over in France, there's Bob the brain surgeon from Eritrea. We'll have him instead.
Yeah.
Like you used to pick your football team at school. And everyone put their hand up.
No one wanted to be picked last.
No one wanted to be picked last, no. So, is it that? This seems to be mental.
It doesn't seem to be something that the French would sign up to, really, would it? It's hinges on. It's the Financial Times was the first to report this. Now it hinges on a quote from a British official, unnamed British official, who says we are in early discussions about a scheme that would see a small number of migrants return to France in exchange for accepting others, in line with what we have discussed about prioritising family reunion. So these would be people who could prove that they had family already in this country, but were in France. So we would take them so they could be with their family, and we would send back. But also, if you're trying to reduce the numbers, one in, one out, that isn't going to reduce the numbers, is it?
No, that's the bit that I can't work out.
I don't quite understand.
Because there is an issue with social cohesion, and OK, Starmer could say, well, I could address that with the one in, one out thing, but the other, perhaps the bigger issue, is the numbers.
Yeah, it does seem a bit odd. But again, I seem to remember that Rishi Sunak bunged the French quite a lot of money, of taxpayers' money, to deal with it.
There's about $500 million
on their
side.
There's $500 million on their side of the channel to have better patrols on the beaches, what have you, and it doesn't seem to have worked at all. So
yes,
who knows? They might have more luck with this. But on the face of it, it requires a little bit more information, I think, before we can pass judgment on.
Absolutely right. And this one as well, tying into what's been going on in Birmingham, of course. Keir Starmer faces a wave of strikes this summer as teachers, NHS staff, civil servants, university workers planning walkouts. I mean, this is... I know everybody always comes up with, it's going to be like the 1970s again. Honestly, we don't remember.
Should have written that story a few times.
Yes, indeed. We don't remember the 1970s, but it won't stop headline writers putting it in there again, I promise you. But yeah, I mean, that is ultimately the analogy people will make, because we know what's happened with the bin strike in Birmingham. Yeah. And there are other areas of British life where there are planned walkouts at a time when the government have got no money.
Well, quite. And, this was the part of the Labour's pitch to the country last year was, the Tories, industrial relations are in the toilet. That's why the nurses are on strike and the trains are never running on time. We'll come in and we'll fix it. Well, if the opposite happens, if it comes in and if anything gets worse under Labour, then voters are, I think, entitled to turn around and say, well, hang on a minute, you guys said you were going to come in and fix it.
100%.
And you've not blatantly not fixed it, so...
And how are they going to be, like the union, the kind of... the real aggressive union masters who are always bald and called Mick for some reason.
And Bob Crow.
Or Bob, yeah. And they all seem to talk like that. They have a very sort of similar tone where they do pronounce their T's, but in a very strange sort of South London way. Anyway, they love all of that, but they won't care that okay, this is Labour, supposedly the party that would be their friends, who have said, look, we haven't got any money. We've had to take away fuel allowance from old people and money from disabled people. And you want more money because you work in the NHS or a teacher or whatever. Yeah. I mean, but union bods don't worry about that. They'll have that row if they want to have that row.
They're completely unsentimental, basically, because their job is to represent their members, and if they don't think that their members are getting a food, it's up to the government to find the money. Yeah. They're not going to take that on as an argument. They can't go back to their members and say, oh, I'm not getting any money, I'm afraid. They'll be like, no, you're going to have to find the money because our members are underpaid. So, and if you don't, then we'll strike. And again, in the run-up to the local elections, only a couple of weeks away, it's not a great look again, if it looks like public services are being damaged by striking.
I saw somebody on social media, and I tried to look for it a couple of days ago, oddly, who had suggested that if you work in the public sector, you should actually be paid slightly less, but you should be given free accommodation, and the accommodation you get will be your workplace, so you can sleep where you work. And I was trying to think about that, like if you're a doctor, there's a few beds around, not as many as we need. If you're a teacher, you've got to sleep in the classroom.
Yeah, it seems a bit...
Or a crash mat in the assembly
an extreme
hall.
Position.
Well, it might. I mean, some people might opt for it.
Yeah.
There's worse places to. Some people haven't got a home, Kevin.
Not many. Not many are going to want to sleep on the desks. I would venture.
If you work for the police, what do you sleep in a cell? I mean, what do you do?
Well, we haven't got many of them either.
No, we're full of those. Yeah, prison officers sleeping in cells. That would be a terrible, terrible thing to happen. Listen, Kevin, great to have you on with us again.
No worries.
Always good to chat. And of course, Kevin Schofield is the political editor at HuffPost UK. Thank you to him. Back to you with more comment in a couple of moments. 0344 499 1000.
Well, I don't care about the welfare of dangerous criminals or terrorists. I care about the protection of prison officers, because these are brave people, they're doing a difficult job, often for not very much money, and we should be putting their safety above those of the criminals every single time. And what's happened in recent years in our prisons is governors have not got a grip, often for fear of political correctness, but also we've seen the courts intervening and dictating how governors should be running their prisons and protecting their officers.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Siobhan says, I've just spat my tea out laughing, but unfortunately I don't know which bit, because I do sometimes like to know if I've been funny or not. This one comes from Boffin, who says, no man looks like a woman. Those women who take testosterone and grow beards can continue to use the men's toilets, as men don't care. We just revert to social norms that applied before activist misogynists wiped out decent behaviour, says this one. And it's similarly echoed by Simon in... I disagree with that, by the way, because I've met God knows how many trans women, and I genuinely, quite honestly, I'm not saying this for any sort of touchy-feely kind of house points, genuinely wouldn't know. When I first had India Willoughby on this programme years ago now, I genuinely didn't know that India was a trans woman. Simon in Cumbria says, there is no issue with trans men using men's toilets, as Peter Tatchell disingenuously claimed. This was about keeping men out of women's spaces. No bloke cares if another bloke or a woman dressed as a bloke uses their spaces, as there are no safeguarding issues. Let's take some calls on this. Samantha is in Rill on this gender ruling. Samantha, what have you got for us? Hi.
Sam will do.
Sam, that's better.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, what's ignored in a lot of this, and, you know, it's been bubbling away, is a hostility that exists between some, a sizable chunk probably, of lesbians. I mean, don't get me wrong, I get on very well with lesbians, and I don't go out dressed like a Christmas tree, like the transvestite sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I'm much more gender neutral. But there's an absolute hatred, and I was told this right at the beginning. I couldn't understand it. And some gay men also have a problem. I don't know what their issue is either. I suppose the lesbians have a same revulsion towards transgender women as straight men, perhaps.
But is it a revolt? I mean, how long have you lived your life as a woman, Sam? Let me just be blunt and ask you that.
25 years.
25 years. So you... look, the history of that is your business, but clearly you thought, I'm not in the right mind, space, body or whatever, so, you know, I'm going to do something about it. Up until recently, and when recently I mean 5-10 years, but maybe the last 5 in particular, were you getting the kind of abuse you sense you get now?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
You just talked about the abuse that trans people get. Is that something that's relatively new?
No, I wouldn't say it's existed for years. I mean, one issue was the LGBT was accepted by Stonewall in England, but the Welsh branch refused, and it was LGB for many years after.
Some people do see them as separate issues.
Yeah, yes, they might well be, but then a lot of trans women are lesbian, as I am.
So you're a lesbian?
Yes.
So that's hence your point about the lesbian, not all lesbians' views on trans people.
Yeah, I'm terrible for generalising.
No, that's all right. No, don't worry about that. I'm interested in that bit of the spectrum, because the issue that our previous guest raised, if a girl doesn't fancy you, does that make her transphobic?
No, I don't think so. Not at all.
Do you think other people should, because this ruling today says that you are not a woman, right? You can live like your life as a woman, and nobody should be unkind. But it says you're a woman. The definition of a woman is quite clear, and the verdict has come down, transgender women are not legally women. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I feel it's awful. I think a certain element of the transgender society has brought it about themselves by just being totally over the top and ridiculous about. I mean, I didn't realise you could get a gender
certificate
certificate if you hadn't had surgery.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, because of various things, I haven't even bothered to get one.
But you had the surgery years ago.
I've had the surgery years ago, but years ago you had to jump through a hoop and go before like a tribunal, I think. And
have you ever had any problems in changing rooms? So presumably you use women changing rooms.
Well, yeah.
Has anyone ever said, "What are you doing in here?"
I'm trying to think. Toilets. I was in Nottingham once. Went into the female toilets with my girlfriend and a very young lesbian. To great exception to it. Oh, whether she thought I was still intact, I don't know. As a male, but...
Is that, do you so as a trans woman, do you think that is I mean, some say it's not a relevant factor, but do you sense that if somebody is, and I did touch on this a little while ago, that if someone has had surgery, then I don't think they could say you're going through a phase if you've literally had your genitals removed. I mean, that clearly, I'm being blunt about this just to make the point. Clearly, it's a bit more than a phase. So, but that is, do you sense then, as someone who is post-operative trans, that there is a difference between a bloke with a beard and a penis who calls himself a woman and you?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they disgust me, really.
Say again?
Because they disgust me, really, to be honest. Going around like that, I mean, I know the odd day if I haven't put makeup on, I can look a bit rough, but there's a difference.
Got it. I hear you. Listen, Sam, thank you very much indeed for your call. Sam in Rill on gender ruling, on the gender ruling. I remember Frank Maloney, the boxing promoter, who... And do you remember the story of how it was... suddenly out of nowhere, Frank became Kelly, and like of all people, I mean, you might say that of all, but really, Frank Maloney is a woman, and I got to know, and I mentioned Frank as in previous identity because I sort of got to know Frank a bit through a curious sort of set of circumstances, largely through TalkSport, but anyway. And then one day, I opened that newspaper and Frank has become Kelly. And I remember interviewing Kelly and that question about, sounding like a bloke or being a bloke, I only say that because our last caller just referred to it. And Frank, or Kelly, as in the new name, said, well, look at me, you know I'm a bloke. My kids call me Dad, and I don't really care. I'm not that bothered. This is the identity I want. This is the one I've got. That to me is largely fascinating. So there's not one sort of size-fits-all answer to all of these issues and problems. 0344 499 1000. Your response on the ruling as well. Gender court ruling. Has common sense prevailed? Answers on that as well. The one-in, one-out immigration policy from Keir Starmer with the French. I mean, this man's a lunatic, isn't he? And also Reform UK is a mad far-right racist party, according to a teachers' union. Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? We're going to get into that a little bit more after 3, but if you've got an initial comment, lines are open. It's 2:30. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Just gone 2:30. Look who's... I was about to say, look what the cat dragged in, but that would be unfair, wouldn't it? Paul Champlino, the founder of Landlord Action, lifelong Spurs fan. He said to me before the show, don't mention Spurs.
I just set myself up, didn't I?
Well, you set yourself up, but I did say, well, I wouldn't, there's no reason for me to goad a Spurs fan as a man that whose team just got...
I went on a Spurs show podcast last week.
Did you?
Talk about doom and gloom. Oh, my God.
Was it really?
It was doom and gloom.
Well, I've told you this before, that when I went to see Chelsea Spurs at White Hart Lane, I had to sit in the Spurs end because my mate, who was the mascot at the time, I think, got me a ticket. So I was with the heart.
You were the
Spurs.
mascot?
No, he was the mascot.
Oh, right, OK.
But he gave me
That'd
his ticket, so
That'd
I sat there. So I couldn't celebrate any goals.
Oh, yeah,
we've all done
and
it.
And it is toxic, Spurs Chelsea.
Yeah, and this was hard. These were the proper hardened Spurs fans. I had to really keep still.
Yeah.
I bet
you beat us. Did you beat us?
Yeah, I think it was 3-2.
3-point lane, they say.
Yep, yeah, 3-point lane. Yeah. But it was... yeah, I mean, we all know that at the end of a match, if it gets to the 80th minute and you're 4-0 down, people start to leave.
Yeah.
But this was before the first half had finished. People were going, I don't want to see this. They didn't like what they were seeing, so they legged it.
I know, it's torture. It's depressing. Anyway, can we talk about property or something
Let's talk about property.
Please.
We've got a lot to talk about, and we've got questions. You've got a question you want to put to Paul, 87222 as well. You can send that through to us. We'll do those in the next section. Increasing number of landlords are selling up ahead of the Renters' Rights Bill. We've been talking about this, Paul, for years now, because it originally came in under the Tories.
Yeah.
And so, we can talk about Angela Rayner and her kind of policy of doom. Michael Gove was just as responsible for this because he was going to go full pelt as well.
Yeah, I mean, it all started actually with George Osborne, who brought in a tax where they taxed landlords on turnover, not profit, and that changed the game. That was in 2017.
Yeah.
That was called Section 24. So that was the start of the beginning of the end.
Yep.
And then, of course, you've had loads of regulation coming. I've said 5-6 years ago, when they talk about the abolishment of Section 21, which is the non-fault eviction notice, that's going to crank up. And I'm seeing it at Landlord Action. I still run Landlord Action to this day. We're seeing more and more landlords that, I want to get my tenant out, I want to sell up.
Yeah.
The losers are tenants, obviously. Then, of course, you had interest rate rises. You had the uncertainty of EPCs. I'm talking, educating landlords day in, day out. They are having enough. I mean, I've got some stats here.
We had COVID as well,
We had COVID, of course.
Which meant that people were in arrears, and there was all sorts
and then,
of
course, people don't trust the courts. The courts are breaking
100%.
down. I mean, we're waiting at Landlord Action 15 months for an eviction date for a landlord that's not getting rent.
Yeah.
I mean, how can they pay the mortgage and do that?
Because most landlords have a mortgage, of course.
Most landlords have got loads of mortgages, and of course, albeit I do have to remind landlords they want 0% interest for a long time, and some landlords do have short-term memories.
True
but
enough.
I mean, some stats that have come in the last 3 months of 451,000 properties that were listed, 70,000 of them were rented properties, and 18,000 properties have been sold since Q4 last year. So if you think there's 18,000 rental properties being sold, that means there's more than 18,000 tenants in a property, because some of them could be a house of multiple occupation.
Of course,
So there's lots of tenants being asked to leave a property. Right? The unintended consequence, which the government don't realise, is that, of course, rents have gone up, tenants are being told to leave, then there becomes an even bigger temporary accommodation problem, and then of course it adds to 1.3 million people on a council waiting list. It is a nightmare.
But that was like a 5-year-old could have worked that out.
Yeah, I know.
They? What were they thinking when they, if they're going to make the industry, and no good landlord is worried about, decent rules and regulations. Most landlords,
they comply.
Yeah, well, they comply, and also they want to run a tidy ship because that's their profession. Why would they want it to be any other? We know there's some rogue characters out there,
of course,
whose house is made of mould, and nobody wants to see those guys. But they're few and far between in comparison to the majority.
Bad tenants as well.
Yeah, of course, and bad tenants too. But if you suddenly are going to go in there, and I think the problem with Labour is that it's sort of in their DNA. So their default position is that landlords are the pirates of bricks and mortar. We don't like these people very much. They exploit, they make too much money, they don't give a hoot about how people live. So they've already got that position.
Yeah, and look, the tenant organisations have an agenda, but they work on them versus us, which doesn't help. I've tried to engage with the likes of Shelter. I've had no joy whatsoever. And there's an agenda there, you know, unfortunately.
And Chelsea have been very much advising.
Yeah, they have been advising. I mean,
look,
most of the renters' rights bill, and it's going through amendments at the moment. I mean, you know, they're changing the grounds with regard to rent arrears. There's more rent arrears being a mandatory ground. They're changing periodic tenancies from fixed-term tenancies. They're bringing in new grounds. The courts are backing up. You know, if you don't have confidence in the industry and you have uncertainty, and being designed and being called a landlord is a dirty word, then of course, you know, because we have a housing shortage, and of course only, what was it, last month, the 1.5 million target went down to 1.3. And of course we don't have a work skills. We've talked about this. There is, you know, someone that's lived and breathed this for the best part of 34, 35 years from being in the legal profession and setting up Landlord Action 25 years ago, and I am a landlord. I tell it how it is. And I get decent landlords to say to me, Paul, I've had enough. And they're good landlords, and they care about their tenants.
And there's lots of things. And again, if you've just got a couple of properties, you might have inherited one from, you know, a family member, and then thought, well, you know, this is maybe a good way to have a little bit of a pension. I'm not going to become a squillionaire. And then people start piling on the rules and regs. So, for example, if you have to have a different boiler in your house, and you've got to get your energy rating from a D to a C or an E to a C, net zero. I mean, that in itself could cost you tens of thousands of pounds. That wipes out any kind of profit.
There is actually some good schemes out there, but EPC upgrades is a big issue. It is a real problem. It's, you know, I get really, really frustrated because I live and breathe this. And, you know, you've got, 2.74 million landlords. The industry has to be professionalised, without a doubt. So I agree with a lot of this regulation, like Awab's Law, where, you know, a 6-year-old died from mould 2-3 years ago. I mean, you should be, albeit the social housing properties are far worse than the private rental sector.
Well, that's the thing. These are council
But they don't get the grief that private landlords get.
Why is that? I mean, they're not also going to be... Are they fully subjected to this new renters' rights bill?
Some of it is applicable, some of it is not applicable. But I mean, if you look at complaints, they went up something like of complaints about disrepair in the last year. They went up 300 times.
Wow.
In the social housing sector. We have a severe shortage of property. The private
100%.
rental sector. I think the problem is that the agenda now against the anti-landlord feeling is everyone's just fed up with it. And you keep on, I said this so many times, you keep on poking the bear eventually bites back. And I see it firsthand. The bear biting back is landlords selling with decent tenants in a property who've not had a rent rise and have to try and find something else and compete against 20 other applicants, which is stressful. Really stressful.
And then, of course, you're going to end up in this, as we just touched on. So loads of landlords leave the industry. Thousands of people are looking for places to live. There are fewer
rents
places,
are going up,
so rents will go up accordingly.
And of course, you know what? They also brought another rule in, and again, it's at amendment stage. I mean, it's going to come in, and you know, we're not getting good news as landlords, and you know, we are the bottom list with regard to good news and getting medals and stuff like that. But they brought a rule in, Ian, where a landlord won't be able to charge more than 1 month in advance. So the unintended consequences, you have overseas students that come in that don't have credit ratings. You also have scenarios where there's obviously the UK students. You have tenants that are on lower income that might pay 6 or 12 months in advance. That's all going to stop. So, of course, referencing is going to be tighter. You're going to need guarantors. I mean, there's a good company called Rent Guarantor that do guarantors where landlords will say, nope, you can't, I want this, this, this and this. So the criteria for referencing goes through the roof. And the biggest losers in all of this are tenants.
Of course they are. I heard an extraordinary element to this as well. One of the rulings that so there you are, merrily renting out your property. You think, right, I want to sell the property because I've decided that I'm no longer going to be a landlord. So you flag it that it's going to be so. You tell the tenant says fine. You know, these things happen. Off your tenant goes, and your sale falls through. You can't then relist it for rental.
That's right, under the new rules.
For like, what, 8 months or something?
Yeah, it's going to be 8 months. I mean, what's going to happen
that's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary.
What's this, North Korea, Paul?
I know, and it's not just that, because if a tenant doesn't leave, you have to have a reason why to get them out. So obviously, you've got to wait 8 months to serve a 4-month notice to be able to sell a property. Where a lot of landlords now are serving 2-month notices to sell. Antisocial behaviour is a massive problem. I mean, you know, the grounds are so weak. I mean, if you've got an antisocial neighbour, or you're in an HMO, a house house and there's some with mental health issues and whatever, you're too scared to give evidence. But you've got to go and get a court order. I mean, there's so many unintended consequences, and of course we've got a failing, broken court system.
Indeed. Couple of other property stories worth touching on, away from the specifics of landlords. Inflation falls to 2.6%. What does that mean for mortgages, pensions, savings and all the rest of it? Well, I mean, certainly mortgages, is that good news all round?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, we want inflation to come down, so it means mortgage rates come down. I think I read recently there was something like, I think I read it today, there's something like 700 or 800 products now of 5 and 10% deposits. So that's good news. We want mortgage rates to come down. But, I mean, payment growth actually went up almost 6%. And believe it or not, there's still 780,000 jobs available at the moment. So, but they do anticipate, they still think inflation might go up next month, because what they haven't accounted to is business costs that's going to happen. And we're going to get bigger bills in energy costs in April.
So we've had this slight
It could be a bit of a false dawn.
I think so. And I was hearing today that they reckon 3.6% by April, even though it's come down to 2.6%, and possibly by September 3.7%.
I know. We need inflation to come down. I mean, obviously, we know under the Tories it was double digits and stuff. But, Pete, the reality is, everyday people are struggling. I mean, I'll tell you one quick story. I took a client out, and he's on 100 grand a year. So he's on a really good wage, and he's leaving London to move to Bournemouth. He goes, I can't afford to live in London.
Wow.
So what I'm saying to you is, there's, it's not just the low income. There's people, middle earners, and on good money,
of that,
and people are struggling with costs across the board. It's really affecting everyone.
100%. Before we take a break, Paul, low deposit mortgages. You just touched on this. Deals at the highest for 17 years. So there are more than ever before. There's 400
for first-time buyers.
Borrowers with a 5% deposit now have 442 deals available, double the choice from 2 years ago. Is that almost too much choice?
Well, we need more choice.
True.
From where we've been. I think, look, we want first-time buyers. The hardest thing now, I think the average first-time buyer in London has to save up 130 grand for a deposit.
That's insane.
That's mental to live in London. We think about our kids, and you've got younger kids than me. It's like a pipe dream, obviously, 100%. To own a property. I think shared ownership is a really good initiative where you can end up buying 25% and it's split. Help to Buy needs to come back. We need first-time buyers, but the reality is, rents do need to come down. It has been unsustainable, and especially if you've got an average rent in London, we're talking about London, we are in London, central London now, is £2,400 a month. You've got all your other bills and that, and how can someone save? So there is real affordability issues, as well as obviously rising costs. Yeah, and then, I've forgotten how many times I've spoken to people, like predominantly in their 20s, who've gone, we finally, after 5 years, saved up for the deposit, but then by that stage, the house prices have gone up, the deposit was a greater deposit. But the majority of people have only got, they did a survey, I can't remember what it was, the majority of people have only got 5 grand for a deposit.
Yeah.
Which is nothing.
Which is nowhere near.
And I remember when I bought my first, I was lucky, I was 22, 23 years old, I bought my first flat for 40 grand. So the deposit was 4 grand, That's just a complete, that feels like a million miles.
To be fair, Paul, that was in 1943.
You can't talk either. Pot and kettle, please, Ian.
You're not wrong. We've got the same coloured hair, at least.
We have.
Listen, stay with us. Paul Champalier is with us. We've got some questions coming from you next here on Talk.
Well, I don't care about the welfare of dangerous criminals or terrorists. I care about the protection of prison officers, because these are brave people, they're doing a difficult job, often for not very much money, and we should be putting their safety above those of the criminals every single time. And what's happened in recent years in our prisons is governors have not got a grip, often for fear of political correctness, but also we've seen the courts intervening and dictating how governors should be running their prisons and protecting their officers.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 10 to 3. I was just telling Paul during the break there, well, I won't tell you about everything I was telling Paul, prefabricated houses. I had that great experience the other day when I was walking the dog, and there was like a space between two houses, and they'd laid the foundations a couple of months back, and I thought they're going to start building the house soon. I'm walking the dog 7 a.m. About 7 p.m. I walk the dog again. There's a flipping house.
I know, it's mental, isn't it?
It's gone up. They've got a prefab set up.
It's going to be the way forward.
And it's just like, and it was, I think they were German, because all the German lorries were there. Big crane, obviously.
If it's German, it's going to work then, isn't it?
Exactly. It's going to work. So they got this thing up, and I thought, and obviously the engineering and the technology, I would imagine, around things like prefabs are very different from what they were maybe, you know, a few years ago.
But I think if you're going to relax planning laws, you know, which obviously this government want to do, I think prefabs will be the way forward.
It's going to be a bit cheaper as well.
Oh, they're going to be a lot cheaper, and they're going to be able to put them up a lot quicker.
Yeah. Let's do some questions. We can talk about where you're going to be out and about soon as well.
Yeah.
Because you're always all over the country.
I am. Yeah.
You're like flipping Alan Wicker.
Well, not as exotic.
There's a cultural reference.
You know,
for the kids.
I did a talk not long ago in Darlington.
Did you?
Yeah. Alan Wicker doesn't do talks. He didn't do any talks in Darlington, did he?
I was in Darlington as well. A couple of weeks ago as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I didn't talk up there. So I speak all the time. You know.
You do.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that. Emily in Leeds says, with house prices in the northwest predicted to rise 5% this year, is now a good sign for first-time buyers to enter the market, or should they wait? I mean, that's always the $64,000 question. I know, you know, a friend of ours, David Coughlin, always says, you know, when's the best time to buy a house? He says now. Yeah.
Well, if you've got money, and you can budget, you know, and you stress test yourself with regard to expenditure, and what's your disposable income, you know, there are deals out there. I would say buy now. You know, just if you're first time out, just get on that ladder.
Get on it. Here's a question from Claire in Bristol. With the proposed increase in minimum EPC rating to C, for those who don't know, that's your energy rating. You'll see it on the bottom of your details. So the minimum expectation to C by 2030. Is any financial support available for landlords needing to make energy improvements?
Right, so the answer is yes. So depending on what area you're in and where your local council are, they have schemes signed up which are linked to the government, where if there's any tenants that are anyone that's on benefits, okay, you could be on child benefits or whatever, there's lots of companies out there that offer incentives, you know, free boiler, free pumps and whatever. There are incentives, there are initiatives, and there are initiatives out there for landlords as well as home occupiers. It depends on the area and it depends if there's funding.
Got it. Daniel in Sheffield says, the Renters' Rights Bill aims to ban rental bidding wars. How will this affect landlords' ability to set competitive rental prices?
So the reality is going to be, at the moment, it's a free-for-all and it's like an auction. And landlords are getting great rents, and I remind them that you are getting great rents. What will happen is the new bill is, you know, instead of putting in for 1,000 and then you have a bid up to 1,300, what's going to happen is the landlord's going to stick it in for 1,200. You know, so the rents are naturally going to be pushed up. You know,
so there won't be a bidding war as such, but they would have already factored that into.
They would have factored that in. You know, so I think that's going to be the reality.
Great one from Olivia in Cardiff says the average UK house price is now £377,182. Is this trend sustainable? Are we heading towards a market correction? It's never going to go back to what it did in the 90s, is it? It's not going to do that where your house tripled over about 10 years.
Well, just look at the population. We've got 68 million people now. Look what we had in the early 90s. Right, you've got maybe 15 million. You know, people have got to live somewhere.
Yeah.
Whatever you are on that scale, wherever you're on that ladder, I think the reality is, look, it's house building. We have a massive shortage. We're an island.
Yep.
I think, but it is. I mean, think about what you just said. The average house price is £377,000.
That's insane.
That's mental. I remember it must have been about, if you go back maybe 5-10 years ago, it was in its mid to late hundreds.
Yes.
It just shows how much the market has gone up.
But they always keep saying that each time, again, the 1990s were, you know, I'm the bloke that bought a house in the 90s.
Yeah. So did I.
And then flogged one in the 90s. Should have sold it in the noughties. Because it would have doubled. But, you know, we can play that game forever and lose sleep over it if you want to.
Yes, of course.
But it's not ever going to do that thing, is it?
No, that won't happen.
But it's also probably not going to go down in price.
It's not. I mean, there may be small corrections, but don't forget, in between that, we had a global crash as well. Subprime mortgages and how that was. So, and then, of course, we had record, you know, if you think about the interest rates now, they're actually a decent, normal standard.
Yeah, true enough. One from Fiona in Belfast. Given the recent global economic uncertainties, I think that's Trump, tariffs, China, all that's going on there, will international trade tensions affect UK property market?
Well, look, I think what's going to happen, I can tell you now from experience, I work for a lot of big pension funds that use me and my organisation, Hamilton Fraser, and all our different brands, and there's massive corporates coming in. You know, I've got one client that's bid for a portfolio of £1 billion.
Wow.
Right, massive, thousands and thousands of units, and they are a pension fund. So pension funds are investing into residential and commercial property.
Which tells you something. Yep.
I know there's an issue with regard to freehold and leasehold and common law, and that's something a bit different. But I can tell you now, you know, I think the dynamic is changing when the small landlords are leaving and there's corporate landlords. But I know big corporates that I speak to CEOs and whatever, and they're piling in. So that tells you something, you know.
Listen, before we finish, you're out and about. Where are you? A couple of things you wanted to mention.
Yeah, so I've started a YouTube channel. I should have done it ages ago. It's called Paul Champliner Talking with an N, no G, property.
Mr. Beast, move over. Champlina's in town.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I do a section where I do lifetime stories and property, where I interview like people that are top of their game and stuff. So I might even get you on.
Wow. I'd love to be on.
Right, great. You are top of your game, aren't you?
Well, I was about to say. I mean, that's the question.
You're not declining. You're still on the up.
I hope not.
Right, good, yeah. So I've got a YouTube channel. I'm putting on a landlord educational day in Euston for landlords, survival guide for 2025.
Got it.
On the 4th of June. And then I am out and about. I'm in Liverpool, I'm in Birmingham. I'm speaking everywhere at the moment, doing talks and training lots of letting agents on how to attract landlords to their business and become regulated.
Indeed. You're the Landlord Investment Show in Ashford.
Yes, I'm there as well, yes.
Now, you see, I do a couple of things, with as you know, with the Landlord Investment Show.
I'm there.
With Steve and Tracy and over at Billingsgate.
Yes.
But this is in Ashford. What's interesting is the venue that is in, that's where I used to when I worked in local radio. I was in that hotel.
So you're going to be there?
No, I'm not there.
Oh, you're not there?
No,
I'm there.
Walked out. You're there.
I'm
not there.
So I'll be your replacement. We've got grey hair. I'll put glasses on.
Indeed, yeah.
But actually, on that day,
make yourself look about 15 years younger, and you'll be
of course.
Home
I
and
need
dry
a bit of Botox. On that day, actually, I've got 3 talks. So I'm there, and then I'm doing a talk to letting agents. Then I'm doing a talk. Believe it or not, the business I set up, Landlord Action, we're 25 years strong.
Wow,
I can't believe it. You know?
That's incredible.
When I started, I was 6'2".
And a United fan.
Yes.
We hit the clock, Paul. We will have you back on again very soon. He is Paul Champliner, of course. Check out Paul's YouTube channel. And when he's out and around in the country, if you see that name anywhere connected to Paul, get along and see him. Have a listen to the talks and various other bits and pieces he's up to. Never, ever dull. Paul Champliner with us. And we're back after the news at 3 o'clock.
UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome back to the show. 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is the home of common sense. Transgender women are not legally women. This was the verdict from that Supreme Court landmark ruling earlier today. Is it a case of common sense prevailing, or are there other issues from this that you're either uncomfortable with or sense didn't go far enough after years of debate, it should be said, political campaigners, you name it, on all sides of this one, losing their minds somewhat. But this made it to the Supreme Court. That is their ruling. Your response. Meanwhile, Reform UK is a far-right racist party led by a pound shop Donald Trump. That's according to Britain's top teaching union. We'll get more response on that in a moment. We'll chat to one anti-fascist officer at Stand Up to Racism. He's Lewis Nielsen. Delighted to have Lewis on the programme. We'll get a view from him. And an increasing number of properties are being sold by landlords ahead of the Renters' Rights Bill. According to new data, as you were hearing, your response and thoughts to that. And Britain's classrooms are being filled with unqualified teaching assistants. This is extraordinary, including out-of-work actors and shop workers, as desperate schools look to fill gaps with cheap labour. Who'd have thought it? Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. So, this is the National Education Union. This is the largest teaching union. They've labelled Reform UK as a far-right racist party. They've dismissed Nigel Farage as a pound shop Donald Trump. At their annual conference, they pledged funds to oppose the party. Delegates backed a motion accusing it of exploiting societal issues and scapegoating vulnerable groups, including refugees and religious minorities. Let's speak with Lewis Nielsen, anti-fascist officer at Stand Up to Racism. Lewis, good afternoon to you, sir.
How are you doing, Ian?
Very well, thank you. Nice to have you with us. Listen, I mean, look, you know, unions and Nigel Farage aren't necessarily the greatest marriage. I wouldn't expect a lot of love between them. But Reform a far-right racist party, is that a step too far for you, even?
No, look, I'm delighted that the National Education Union have said that they're going to campaign against Reform's racism and they're going to stand up to it. Because, to be honest, for too long, Nigel Farage has been given an easy run by the press, by journalists and big press corporations like talkTV, and I think it's good to see someone standing up and calling it out. So we support what the National Education Union said yesterday, and we look forward to taking on Reform and their racism. I mean, taking on Reform is brilliant. I mean, I love democracy in all shades. I am as delighted that a Green Party or a Socialist Party are out there as I am that Reform or any other party, because it's a spectrum. Racist, though. I mean, I look at Reform, I look at some of the people in it, a lot of old left-wingers that joined Reform because from the sort of Tony Benn area of left-wing politics. Looking at that, I think, is it a racist party? Surely it's just a Conservative party, isn't it? Well, look, we think they're racist for three reasons. One is they blame migrants, refugees and Muslims for the problems in society. There are some very real problems in society, but they're not caused by migrants and refugees. And we think Reform scapegoating them, we think they're using racism to do it. And we think it's the oldest trick in the book. And I don't know what your definition is of racism, Ian, but we think they are using the oldest trick in the book to do this.
But
just let me finish. The second reason is that if you look at their candidates, there are countless Reform candidates that have had to be removed for having links to fascist organisations, like or having been in the British National Party, for supporting Tommy Robinson, or for posting Islamophobic stuff on social media. And the third reason we think they're racist is because this is what Nigel Farage has made a career out of. His hero is Enoch Powell. The UKIP days, he's sucking up to Elon Musk and Donald Trump. He's a racist, and we've got to call him out for that.
Well, he's not here to defend that, of course. I think he would deny that his hero is Enoch Powell. But look, calling out issues around immigration, refugees and some parts of you can't be racist against a religion, but calling out aspects of a religion that still doesn't make you. You might not like the language, you might not like the subject matters, Lewis, because you're probably on the left and he's on the right, and it's the easiest way to attack someone is go as low as you can, and you've gone for the racism card, literally with no evidence about it, just talking about the fact that a party has very robust issues on immigration. It doesn't make you a racist, does it?
Well, I think the fact that it's attracting candidates who
but they're
support
getting rid of those
like
candidates.
Tommy Robinson. I think that does make you racist.
Well,
But
look, let me just put this in quickly before you reply. I mean, Tommy Robinson has been, banned from even joining Reform. They've made that quite clear. Don't want anything to do with Tommy Robinson or anyone that supports Tommy Robinson.
If you look at Farage, the thing that angers me most is he's not just a racist, he's a fraud.
Why is he a racist? You keep saying he's a racist. You've got no evidence that he's a racist.
No, but listen. He went to the poshest private school in Britain, Dulwich College. He was made a millionaire by being a stockbroker and a banker.
Yeah.
And it's an absolute joke that he is trying to say to ordinary people in Britain that the problem is migration. The problem in our society
is not saying it's the only problem.
Like Farage, who are trying to deflect the real problems in society. They're trying to deflect the blame onto migrants.
But we've got a massive problem with immigration, right?
That's what happened in the 1930s. That's what happened against black people in Britain in the 60s
Come
and
on,
70s.
Lewis, you're
and
an
now Farage is doing it
you're
today.
you're a bright guy. I know we don't know each other personally. I know people who know you. They say Lewis is a great guy to have a pint with. But you are talking.
I don't know if we've got mutual friends.
You are talking tosh here. I mean, you're inventing stuff to stand up to support the scaffolding of your own crumbling argument.
Did he go to Dulwich College?
Yeah.
Is he a private school boy?
I didn't dispute it is a private school. I don't know it's one of the best in the country. Don't even know if he's a millionaire. Got no idea at all.
Well, he is a millionaire because he does a lot of jobs outside of Parliament.
Maybe he is a millionaire. Good luck to him. What's wrong with that? Is that illegal now?
Because I do think there's a problem in society, right? I think we live in a very unequal society. I think life for
So you
ordinary
don't like
people is
millionaires?
hard.
So you call them a racist without any evidence?
No, because if you look at what Reform is saying, they're saying that the problem is migrants and refugees.
In one area, that is a problem in life. Any party, Keir Starmer acknowledges that. Keir Starmer does. Kemi Badenoch does. Everybody acknowledges there is a problem with immigration.
Well, there are some very real problems in society. The underfunding on the NHS, the lack of social housing,
100%.
the cuts made to public services.
100%.
Migrants are part of the solution for that. We need more people
Well,
working
not
in
all of them.
homes, working in the NHS, working in our education system. Migrants are not to blame for the problems. If anything, the people to blame are the bankers like Nigel Farage who have got us into this mess. And as Stand Up to Racism, we are going around the country and we're getting a very good reception by saying that Nigel Farage.
But you're talking to an echo chamber, though, aren't you, Lewis?
Saying that you should point the finger of blame at those at the top of society rather than those at the bottom.
Listen, you might be a nice bloke, Lewis. I'm being generous there, and I have no personal angst with you at all. But you are talking gibberish on this one. I mean, you've got no evidence for any of this. It's your desire to think it, isn't it? It's your desire to go, here's a right-winger, therefore they must be racist. It's the oldest one in the book.
Ian, it's an absolute joke to have a press company owned by Rupert Murdoch saying that I'm making stuff up. Let's be clear.
I'm speaking for myself here.
This empire has made millions out of making up bollocks and putting it in newspapers and stuff like talkTV for decades.
Well, we're not making anything up here. We're not making anything up. And if newspapers make stuff up, they end up in the High Court. Despite popular mythology, if newspapers make stuff up, they end up getting sued, they end up in the libel High Courts, and they end up collapsing. It's as simple as that. I know there's a nice, juicy urban myth that it doesn't work like that, but the reality is very, very different. You know that as well, and that's the shameful thing. You're happy to come on to a national radio and television station and say stuff that just isn't true. I mean, that's a bit weird, isn't it? Do you not feel weird saying this stuff, Lewis?
No, I tell you what the truth is, Ian. The truth is that Nigel Farage is rattled by what Daniel Kebede, the General Secretary of the National Education Union, said yesterday. And you're rattled by his racism being called out.
No, I'm rattled because you can't support your own argument. You're saying,
and we're going to reject his racism, and that he's a fraud.
But it's not the right thing to do, is it? So here's a bloke we disagree with, so we're going to call him a racist. I mean, where are you going to go next with the next person you disagree with? They're going to be a paedophile because you don't like what they say?
Sorry, I don't know where you're going with that. But Ian, if you look at Farage, if you look at the far-right riots which happened last August, it's clear that Farage gave those rioters a nod and a wink to do what they were doing when they were marching up and down streets, attacking mosques and attacking black people in Britain. So it's not some joke. Nigel Farage's racism and his language...
That is not... Listen, the people responsible... The people responsible... Lewis, the people responsible for throwing bricks at mostly other white people like coppers, etc., were responsible for that. Not a politician, not you, not Nigel, not anybody. Come on, let's be honest about it.
Well, let's be honest that Nigel Farage's language and his words have very real consequences. His constant whipping up of racism towards Muslims and refugees played a role in what happened in Britain last summer.
Why does...
I'm proud that Stand Up to Racism led the anti-racist response. We got people out, we opposed the far-right rioters, and we pointed the finger of blame at people like Farage, and we're going to continue doing that.
OK, but you won't acknowledge that Reform have a policy of not allowing people like Tommy Robinson in. You won't acknowledge that Reform have more than its fair share of non-white people standing as candidates. You won't acknowledge that many candidates, a fella that plastered a wall around my house a year ago, is an old lefty that joined Reform. And also, will you further acknowledge, Lewis, because you won't recognise anything else I'd said, that actually unions are in a difficult position on this one because there's a lot of left-wingers that like Nigel Farage and they like Reform. You're behind the times on this one, mate.
What we're acknowledging is the Reform candidates who have been exposed and dropped because of their racism, and it's too many. We're acknowledging that the language Farage is using is racist and incendiary, and we're acknowledging that the stand the National Education Union took yesterday has meant that Farage is on the back foot, and we need to see more people standing up against his racism and pushing back against him.
Can you give me a specific example, just before we finish, Lewis, where you've heard Nigel Farage say something that is racist?
Well, if you look at his biography, he said that Enoch Powell was his hero. That's what he said he went into politics for.
Yeah,
we agree Enoch Powell's a racist? If you were motivated by Enoch Powell, would you say that's racism?
Well, you might be you might be motivated by lots of things someone did, as well as stuff you disagree with. I don't know. I can't speak for Enoch Powell, who was a very successful politician and probably went mad at some point.
So you're a fan of Enoch Powell as well, then?
I just said I can't speak for him and went mad at some point. So I've got no idea about Enoch Powell. I don't know anything about Enoch Powell other than his Rivers of Blood speech, and he probably went mad at some point.
He was a very successful politician.
He was a very successful politician.
Well, not really.
That's just a demonstrable fact, wasn't it? But it doesn't in any way endorse him. Lots of people are successful, but Dennis Skinner was a successful politician.
Why is it that Nigel Farage is obsessed with the question of immigration?
Because it's an area no one other party in this country is really touching, Lewis. They're not...
Oh, come on. What, the Conservative Party haven't touched racism and immigration? Come on.
It's
all anyone on your channel talks about.
But the Conservative Party did nothing.
Too many refugees.
The Conservative did nothing about it.
In Britain, there is not a problem of migration. There's a problem of equality in our society. We need more migrants to build the care homes, the social housing, the hospitals, the support networks we need. So we're putting an anti-racist message, and I'll tell you what, Ian, it's getting a really good hearing.
I don't doubt that from your lot it's getting a good hearing, but you have to acknowledge that you can be pretty robust on a position on immigration and not be a racist.
Well, I think it's
Do you recognise that, though, Lewis? That you could say, actually, I think we have too many people coming in. Don't care whether they're white, black, brown or anything. Too many people coming in. We haven't got the infrastructure to support it. Social cohesion is a huge issue. You can attack a religion if you want to because you believe it's incompatible with decency or modern values, whatever religion that might be. You're allowed to do all of that without being Eugene Terre Blanche and a mad racist.
I think it's racist to blame migrants for the problems in society. I think we know where this ends. We know what happened in the 1930s, and we're in a really dangerous situation. Across Europe, you have fascist parties winning big percentages in the polls. In Germany recently, a fascist party got 20%. In Austria, there's a party that was founded by someone who was in the SS who got a massive vote in the election. So it's really dangerous. What we're saying in Stand Up to Racism is we're not going to let that happen in Britain. We got campaigners up and down the country, in Runcorn, in Doncaster, in Hull, and they're getting a really good reception for putting an anti-racist view and saying that there's going to be resistance.
And are all three of your members in agreement with you?
Yeah, all three of them. We got thousands of people up and down the country, let me tell you. If we were so small, Ian, why am I on your show and why is now...
Listen, I'm delighted you're on your show. I was merely throwing back the stereotyping at you. Listen, Lewis, thank you for speaking with us. Lewis Nielsen, anti-fascist officer at Stand Up for Racism, an all-round impenetrable guest. but I'm grateful that he came on with us. We leave and part company on a decent note, I hope. Thoughts on what he just said? 0344 499 1000. Let me just read out some comment from you before we take a break. This from Claire in Worcestershire says, my son, only this week, when my husband and I were discussing politics and reform, who we support, said that it was a racist party. He's 15. I was stunned, as we have open conversations in our home and very balanced view. I asked where he got that information from, and he said his teacher. I was not happy that they're indoctrinating their views as absolute fact when it is not. We are a very balanced and open family, and we want good policing. The baddies of the world don't win and good people do. Kind to all and respect British GB values. Astonishing this is actually happening in our country. And you heard it there with Lewis. And when pushed on, give me a specific example of Nigel Farage being racist, the best he could offer was that on his Wikipedia page, he said he admired, it was Enoch Powell. I'm sure Enoch Powell, if you are a student of politics, is famous for many, many things, but it's the rivers of blood speech that brought him to notoriety, and I think ultimately probably ended his career back then from a racist party, which would have been the Conservatives back then. But when asked and pushed, there isn't ever really any evidence from this, guys. What they really mean is they disagree with someone. He disagrees with Nigel Farage. He doesn't like the idea that Reform are there and very popular, and probably has more members than his organisation does in that respect. I don't doubt there is an audience for his views. It's a democracy. That's absolutely fine. But to suggest there isn't a massive and a growing audience for other parties just because he disagrees with them, and if there is a growing audience, they must be a bunch of loons and racists. I mean, it's the oldest one in the book, isn't it? You know, oh, I disagree, so you must be, you must be a racist. That's a good one. You're a dirty old racist, because I don't like what you're talking about. I haven't really looked at what you're talking about. I couldn't quote what you're talking about. I couldn't even cite your policy on what you're talking about, but I don't like the subject matter, therefore you must be a nasty old racist. I thought we got over that stuff. But Lewis there still loves it. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
I think this is just water off a duck's back to Nigel Farage. He will lap that up because in a way it gives them something to divine themselves against.
100%.
They'll say, well, if these people, these sort of left-wing teaching unions hate us, we can't be all bad. I mean, he got asked about this yesterday actually up in Durham at a press conference, and you know, he was like, I've got nothing against the trade union movement. In fact, they're trying to woo the trade union movement as a way of winning over Labour voters.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 22 minutes after 3 o'clock. Let's go back to it. Pav is in Harrow. How you doing, Pav?
Good afternoon, Ian.
Good afternoon. Yeah, good as gold at this end. Just about, managing to catch my breath now.
Well, I've got to be honest. I was just saying to Lewis that I was going to come on next week, but I've just heard some of the most ridiculous nonsense. I was convinced that you'd gone to a school playground for 12-year-olds. and
There's a bit of that.
Let's just turn around and get to the grips here before I get to the main point. The use of the word racism, I love it when people use it to people like myself because, I don't have the Caucasian skin colour, so it's more difficult for them to use that.
Yeah.
He clearly thought, the idea that calling out every migrant is racist in itself is just problematic because, of course, most sane people will realise that racism is about discrimination based on skin colour. And the idea that we know the skin colour of every migrant coming, as you addressed rightly, again, is a bit ridiculous. The idea that Al can't at the same time be successful as well as potentially racist is obviously axiomatic. The thing that really got me, though, and what I found very entertaining, is often the thing that you and I have spoken about before, Ian, which is the fact that whenever you want to lace an idea with dollops of pathos, i.e. inequality, millionaires are bad, aspirations are bad, private schools are bad, then of course you're going, as you rightly said, you're going to get a receptive audience. But the broader point is, where in society are we going to go if all we're going to do is to forthcome and spew the politics of envy at every time, to turn around and make out as though success is something which needs to be damned, and we need some sort of state or state-led organisation to offer this supposed utopia of having everybody equal. Where are we going to go with that? Who's going to pay for our public services, which is what he was lamenting about, and underfunding, albeit we can disagree on it. Where is all that money going to come from if the exodus of millionaires or these rich people, as this chap turned around and said, continues? Who's going to do that? We had that before I was born in the 1970s. And, at the end of the day, this is the problem. Their sums of these people don't work out, as in the mathematics. Their arguments basically are very flawed. As you said, the echo chamber continues because they'll be playing and people will be drumming, going, really pumping their fist. But when reality bites, as you see in places like Birmingham and elsewhere, for all sorts of reasons, and when they run out of money, then of course it's not as easy to make these ridiculous, preposterous claims, which ultimately, Ian, go against the fabric of our society, which, as I've said to you many times before, proudly, we're not a utopia, but we have got a much better handle of the immigration problem, legally I'm talking about, than any other comparable country in the Anglosphere or indeed anywhere else post-1945. Now, we've had problems, but thankfully we haven't had state-led problems. We haven't had particular minorities being targeted. And of course, this is the issue that a lot on the left have. As soon as you mention a problem, in particular the illegal problem that's happening, they will immediately try to turn around and essentially call that out as being, as I said, racist earlier on, but also they'll try and link it to some sort of mythical Islamophobia. Anti-Muslim sentiment is real. It happens. I don't think anybody's going to deny that. But this idea that any theology, as you rightly said, or any political belief is beyond reproach, frankly needs calling out, as of course does his nonsense that, saying anything contrary towards a Muslim is racism, because under the Race and Religious Tolerance Act 2006, Islam is not a race. There's only two races which are religions in this country. That's Judaism and Sikhism. But I'll leave you on this point, and this is the really disturbing thing, other than the fact that you probably won't get him on the week after next because the school holidays will be over, so he'll no doubt be back at school. But this is the issue. That until these people keep turning around and misleading a lot of people, suggesting that success is somehow a bad thing rather than something to be celebrated and potentially used as an aspiration, we are keep going to go back there again and again and again, because ultimately we need to turn around and offer things that integrate and not divide. And if he was talking about being successful, division is something him and clearly his cabal are enjoying and reveling in, and doubtless they're making a lot of money off, which is the very thing that he's talking about we shouldn't be doing, Ian.
There it is. There's a full circleness about that. Pav, as ever, very thorough. Thank you for that. Brian in Westcliff makes a really good incidental point on the trans issue. Why do trans women make such a fuss about using the ladies' loos? Have they seen the queues for the loos in a theatre or a club? I do feel sorry if I go somewhere like a cinema or a theatre with my other half, and the interval comes up, and she goes to the loo, I go to the loo, I'm back, and I'm a pint down at the bar. before she's even reached a cubicle, I think. It's extraordinary. What happens there, for God's sake? What do you do in those loos? I mean, there's usually more loos, isn't there, in a ladies' loo? You go into a fella's loo, and I know it's those urinal things. Maybe, yeah, we got urinals and cubicles, but I don't understand. It's a little bit more to do than, you know, to have a pee as a woman than a man, but not loads more. Not to the tune of those queues. I've seen queues coming round the flipping block during a theatre show. Phil's in Hertfordshire. Back on the gender issue, Phil. What are your thoughts? Good afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon, Ian. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, what are you thinking?
Good. Yeah, the gender issue.
Yes.
You can change your appearance by dressing up, putting on makeup, surgery, etc., etc. So you appear as either a male or a female, or what it is you're trying to achieve. There's the one thing that you can't change, and that's your mind. What you're born with, what's inside your head. Now, when somebody goes into a toilet that's been transitioned, they are still born with the same mind that they had. So they're male or they're female. So you have a male who looks like a woman, has had surgery to look like a woman. He might feel like a woman, but he's still born male.
He is, but what if his entire life, which seems to be the argument, Phil, as you know, his entire life he's not felt like a male and feels like a female?
That's psychological then, isn't it?
Yeah, but if it's psychological to that person, it's real, right? So it might be psychological, but that's the point.
It may be, but we have to draw the line somewhere, because otherwise the judges would have said, well, you know, to him, he is a woman, so we can allow him. You've got to draw the line somewhere, otherwise it just goes on and on and on.
Is there such a thing then? So if somebody says, look, I'm not making a big fuss about it, but I know there's nothing about me that feels like a man. Everything about me feels like I'm in the wrong body. You might say it's psychological, but would you recognise, Phil, that person genuinely feels like that?
I would recognise that they genuinely feel like that, but then you could probe and give them some counselling to say, well, why? Why do you feel like that? And get them to explain it. I mean, it could be that they've just had their mind turned somewhere in the past. Somebody said something to them. You know, it's like the people that suffer from anorexia, isn't it? Sometimes, somebody might say to them, people, oh, you look a bit fat. That's it. They turn anorexic.
Yeah.
The mind can just be turned.
No, it can, and I think it is a very complicated area. And I'm fine if somebody wants to live their life however they want to live their life. The question is how much does the rest of society do in terms of accommodating that? And
exactly. And I think it's being pushed to accommodate too much.
Yeah.
We have to draw the line somewhere, Ian.
Spot on, Phil. Great call. Thank you for that. This comes in from Gary. Referenced the sort of Labour government's latest initiative for dealing with immigration in terms of our relationship with the French. Some proposal seems to be on the table to have a one-in, one-out policy, so we could get a better class of person, and France would accept from us somebody that didn't fit the bill. Gary says, I've got mixed views about this proposed one-in, one-out arrangement. If negotiated correctly, by which I mean that every migrant arriving here illegally on a dinghy from France is fingerprinted, has DNA samples taken and then returned to France with a guarantee from the French government that if they ever come back to the UK, they will always take these people off us. No question asked, then I think the policy has merit as a deterrent in the long term to migrants getting into those dinghies. And of course, once that flow of illegal migrants dries up, then does the need for us to take anyone in under this one-in, one-out arrangement? If, however, as I suspect will happen, the negotiations with France are handled with customary incompetence with which our governments typically handle everything, then I can already see how disastrous this will pan out. Illegal migrants will come here in dinghies, get sent back to France, where they will then join the queue of illegal migrants waiting for their return to be brought here legally by our government, courtesy of this arrangement. It would basically become a revolving door where the process of coming in and out as an illegal migrant then qualifies them, that individual, to come back again through the door as a legal migrant. That would be worse than what we have now. Yeah, you do run that kind of risk, and I don't know how they would decide who is desirable and who is not. And why would France be willing to accept somebody who isn't desirable in exchange for giving us the person that is desirable? That, to me, doesn't make sense either. What's in it for France, you could say? 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We'll go back to your calls in just a couple of moments. First, Britain's schools are relying on unqualified teaching assistants, including former actors and shop workers, to fill staffing gaps. Head teachers are recruiting anyone who passes a criminal record check, regardless of classroom experience or qualifications. Critics warn the lack of legal standards for teaching assistants is putting pupils' education at risk. Let's speak with Serge Safai, Executive Head Teacher of St Thomas's, the Apostle School. Good afternoon to you, Serge. Good, nice to have you with us.
Hi, Ian. How are you?
I'm all right. I've got somebody in my family who's a teaching assistant. In fact, one of my neighbours is a teaching assistant as well. I always thought there was a bit of a qualification that went with that. The idea that I could become one, apparently not.
Anyone can become one. And this is the point. It's down to the head teacher, how they want to run their school. And if they're appointing TAs just because they want to save money, as opposed to meeting the need of an individual child, I'm afraid they've got it badly wrong. You know, and this isn't a babysitting service. It's supposed to be an educational service.
Yep.
And I suppose people need to be judged by what the outcomes are. But there is no legal requirement, as I've already said, for a head teacher to appoint anyone with any qualifications other than to make sure that they pass the CRB check.
Yeah. Does it depend on? And again, like you say, I mean, head teachers will have different ideas of what they need. So, and of course, some teaching assistants do end up, particularly in primary schools, doing a bit of teaching. You know, it might be rudimentary stuff, but they could end up just for an hour while the teacher's in a meeting or planning the next lesson, etc., whatever it happens to be. But if your job is really to literally just assist, so, you know, you're going to sit and listen to the kids read, or you're going to give them a little bit of assistance with, you know, basic addition. Could that be different? Could it be argued that's okay?
Well, again, we're back to it's the head teacher's decision. On a personal level, I'd rather spend my money on teachers.
Yeah.
You know, end of. I think some disadvantaged children with special needs, they do come as a package when their special need is described. Sometimes they do have to have their own TA pretty much all the time. Now, you could argue that if it's that severe, should they be in the state sector? But that's a different argument. But I'm back to where I was. You know, these figures, they need to be looked at, I suppose. And but if there's anything going wrong, and I've read one or two of the examples there of basically getting anyone through the door just to babysit our children, you know, I'm sorry, that's wrong.
Has it always been the? I mean, certainly when I was at school, I don't think there really were teaching assistants as such.
Yeah,
but
there wasn't.
I don't know when it all came in. Was it in the sort of 90s or something?
It's like the police, isn't it? Where you've got the PSAs, not real policemen, but someone's ticking a box somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
I think, is it a symptom of how we've devalued the teaching profession with all this talk of part-time, starting late? You know, it's a proper job and it's a really important job, and we should take it more seriously. And as I said, as a head myself of several schools at different points, you know, I always kept my teaching assistants down to a minimum, depending on the requirements of the pupils. And this is something that over the years, grumpy old blokes like me getting more and more upset. You know, we need to put the kids first. We saw during lockdown, didn't we? Everyone just happily shutting every school. Now there's talk of teachers' strikes. Yeah. Has anybody not learned anything? So if you've got a school full of TAs doing a job that a teacher should do, well, I'm not a fan of Ofsted, but maybe the new fella can have a look at those schools and say, well, maybe this is the wrong way of running it.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? How many do you have to have? Because, like, schools are now brimming with TAs before someone goes, well, hang on, surely this is an argument to have more teachers. And that's not hard to understand.
No, but the thing is, you've just touched on perhaps my biggest issue as a head, recruitment and retention of good people. There's plenty of numpties out there that want to come and babysit, quite frankly, some of whom are actually qualified.
Yeah.
You know, but you don't want them in your school, and you certainly don't want them near your children. But it's a question of, do you care enough? You know, I mean, our whole systems, I mean, let's face it, before this fella, only in our country would you have a head of Ofsted that's never taught, for goodness sake.
Yeah, that is a bit weird, isn't it?
Isn't it a bit weird?
Yeah, just a bit. Listen, Serge, we will watch with interest how this pans out over the coming years, but I'm not hopeful that there's going to be any dramatic change. We will see. Serge, thanks for coming on with us. Serge Safai, who's Executive Head Teacher of St Thomas the Apostle School. Thank you to him. Thoughts on that? Good TAs are worth their weight in gold. But there is always that feel when you see it that you think, oh, maybe. My sister-in-law was a teacher and opted to become a TA because the workload was so extraordinary. She obviously took I assume some kind of pay cut, but felt that it was a more satisfactory position for her lifestyle. She doesn't have to go home and do any homework or write reports or any of that stuff, but she can still give something to the class. So she's a qualified teacher as a TA. This one comes in from John Ross, who says, the answer to the changing room is the cubicle. This is the trans ruling in the Supreme Court. For those who prefer to use it, the Scottish doctor-nurse dispute had a very simple answer. Good call. Ali in Hampshire, gender-neutral toilets are not acceptable. I'm sick of following a man in a shared gender toilet. Often it smells. There is pee on the floor. The toilet seat is up. I don't share a toilet seat with my husband, let alone random men. They should use the accessible toilets. They are gender neutral. And this one from Tad in Cambridge, regarding the authenticity of the moon landings. You know, there's this story going out there that the Katy Perry rocket thing was a fake. And some bloke on Twitter, because it always is, has apparently got evidence for it. Spoiler alert, there is no evidence. It's all very easy to disprove, but it's kind of gone nuts, this piece that he posted with apparent evidence to back up his claim that it was a fake. Anyway, Tad says, regarding the authenticity of the moon landings, even back in 1969, there existed sophisticated tracking equipment that confirmed that it did actually happen. Do the doubters really think that the Russians and the Chinese would have missed the opportunity to rubbish the Americans for such easily disproven propaganda? The landings happened. The crackpots should get a life. And I think also the other thing with the moon landings, something, and it happens with all these areas of conspiracy, invariably they are areas that have so many people that would be involved in it. I mean, to the tune of tens of thousands, directly or indirectly, that at least one person over that time would have, even if they, you know, if they'd signed a non-disclosure thing, even if they died and left in their will, you know, for a top investigative journalist, read this, here's the plan. You know, none of that has ever happened. There's a good reason why none of that has ever happened, is because it's tosh. But what happens with conspiracies, and this is why they tend to work, well, there's a couple of reasons now, because I think social media in the common age has sort of changed the way we do business as regards debate and discussion and how people think and what they think. But broadly, most conspiracy theories have a kernel of truth in them. There is usually something, not the most significant bit, but there is something that can kick it off. So it sort of drags people in based on a premise that has a little bit of truth. But that truth will be massively out of context. It'll be a bit skew-if, it'll be turned on its head, and then it's added to. And of course, the bit that's true is the bit that's always advanced. Yeah, but it is, look it up. It did happen in 1969. Yeah, it did happen then. Yeah, but the point is this. And all the other stuff that follows is usually the tosh. And then what tends to happen, you will find somebody who is qualified. They weren't there, but they have a qualification in aerospace or medicine, whatever the conspiracy is, and they will back up the conspiracy. They'll go, yeah, in my opinion, this is true. Because, you know, scientists and doctors and qualified people can also be nutters and can also be conspiracy theorists. Out of the millions of people that work in the space industry, there's bound to be, I would imagine, probably a greater percentage of people that have kind of odd thoughts on stuff. So some of them might back it up. But never the people that work at the coalface of it, which is weird. They've all lied for 55 years, every one of them. Philippa is in Dorset. Philippa, what have you got for us on that issue of teaching assistants? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. Lovely to talk to you again,
You
as
too.
usual.
Fire away.
I was a teaching assistant for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went on and qualified as a secondary school teacher. I've got my full QTS, my full NQT. And basically, the reason why they're using teaching assistants is to save money. Teaching assistants are cheaper than qualified teachers.
Yeah.
And it's not just the teaching assistants that schools are using, it's what they call cover supervisors. So a cover supervisor will go into any class on any subject in a school and literally cover the teaching of that lesson. The lesson plans and everything will be left for that cover supervisor to use, and they will follow the lesson plan that's been left for them.
Do they have to be qualified teachers?
No, but what generally happens is supply agencies will use qualified teachers as cover supervisors.
Okay.
And get them into schools that way. So, yes, there will be qualified people teaching. And the thing is, with supply agencies, it's much more expensive for schools to pay teaching staff and cover supervisors than it is to use teaching assistants. The thing is, teaching assistants were put into schools to specifically help specific children with SEND difficulties who had learning plans in place, and they'd sit alongside that child in that lesson and support them through that lesson, or they'd helicopter support students in the whole of the class.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what a teaching assistant's job was or is. Also, I will say that teaching assistants are paid an absolute pittance. Julia Hartley-Brewer was saying that teaching assistants earn about £25,000 a year. That's absolute nonsense. They were still paid on a pro rata situation where they get roughly about £17,000 a year, and that is it. To be in a classroom with 30 students with all the stress, all the behaviour issues, all the SEND issues, there's a lot going on. And it's wrong to pay teaching assistants that amount of money and giving them more responsibility. Personally, I don't think teaching assistants should be used to be teaching classes. They should have qualified teachers in place doing the job they have been trained to do. I spent a year in about 5 or 6 different schools training to be a teacher on top of my degree, my master's and everything. But I can't get a job as a qualified teacher because I've got cerebral palsy. I've got a disability. Schools will not take me on because they see me as a problem. They see my disability as a problem and they won't make adjustments for me. So you've got people like me sat at home with the full qualifications, the full experience, and all that being wasted because they'd rather put teaching assistants in classrooms because they're cheaper.
Yeah. It's a very thorough, I mean, it's a grim analysis, Philippa, but it's grim for, all the positive reasons in terms of you imparting it. Thank you, Philippa in Dorset, with a reality check of what is going on out there. 0344 499 1000. Jeremy Kyle, of course, will be here after 4. We'll chat to Jezza before then and find out exactly what is going on the Big Drive Time show this afternoon. Right now, coming up on 10 to 4.
Because we've constantly taken short-term decisions. It suited us to rush to China looking for investment. Actually, China invests staggeringly little in anything of importance here, except for some of our energy production, so for example nuclear, and they buy into these alien companies for a reason. And I'll come back to the reason why I think this Chinese company, which by the way, you should know that there is no such thing as a private company in China. They are all absolutely dragooned by the government to do as they say.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is from Stuart in Wigan. It says, I don't get annoyed at the far left element labelling everyone racist. Unlike perceptions in some areas of the media, the reality is the younger generation are rebelling against the so-called woke agenda. The under-25s lean towards the right with their politics, which is why Reform are so successful with this age group. It's the 30 to 40-somethings who push the woke agenda that are now looking out of touch with their kids. And I do wonder whether, thank you, Stuart, for that, I wonder whether some of the woke agenda is based on the fact that lots of stuff that the left used to kind of campaign for, they've kind of lost all those arguments. They've, you know, the Labour Party isn't a socialist party in the old, I mean, it is, but it's not in that kind of old-fashioned sense. And the issues that perhaps people on the harder left would have fought for don't really have any traction anymore. So the woke thing kind of gave a whole new, it was like somebody opened a flipping museum of jewels, left-wing jewels. You could pick up on all these wacky subjects that nobody gives a toss about and start shouting and attacking people who are not on board with it, even though most people are not on board with it. But it gave them a new sense of belonging in the absence of anything else to get their teeth into. I'm just thinking aloud here. Is that what's going on here? Matt's in Cheshire. Back to where we began, the gender court ruling this morning. What are your thoughts, Matt? Afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Ian. Can I just say that it was good to see Frank Drebin on earlier on. It wasn't Leslie Nielsen you had on, was it? It was, even though he was more ridiculous than Leslie Nielsen.
It was a bit ridiculous, wasn't it?
Labour and the SNP should be truly ashamed of themselves on this issue. They've used it to sow division and hatred, and to try and compel people to say things and to basically use speech that they know is not true. That was the root of Jordan Peterson's, the beginning of his career. He made his entire career out of fighting against compelled speech.
Yeah. It was the pronoun thing at Toronto University, wasn't it, that really kicked it all off?
Exactly. Is Keir Starmer going to apologise to Rosie Duffield and let her back into the Labour Party? And just one final thing. I'm hearing a lot of things about people being scared now. These people who've been barracking and calling everyone terse for 3 years are now scared and petrified that they're going to get a load of stick.
Sure.
If, as a 6-foot man, I put on a pair of fishnet stockings and went into central Manchester and I got a load of abuse of people, I think when I put the stockings on, I would be expecting people to give me abuse. If also I wore a Carpet Bomb Palestine T-shirt, would I get protected by the police in the same way I would if I was a man in stockings?
Yeah, it's a good point. Good point. In terms of somebody wearing stockings or any other women's clothing for that matter, if let's not get fixated on 1978. Would it, Matt? Would it? You know, if somebody goes out and they are genuinely someone who feels like they're in a woman's body and dress and has done accordingly for years.
Yeah.
Do you see that distinction between that and some bloke that's a bit of a kind of left-wing agitator who wants to just stir things up by going, I'm a woman, you will call me she and her?
Absolutely. I used to go to a club called Blues with a lot of heterosexual mates in the early 90s. It was a transvestite and gay club. Everybody got on. Everybody had a great time. Nobody judged anybody. Nobody was attention-seeking. Nobody was unstable. And everybody just sort of had a great time. And what we've got now is exactly what I said at the start. People using these issues to create hatred and division.
Matt, it's a great point to finish on. Thank you, Matt in Cheshire. And this from Lorraine, the National Education Union and Reform. The NEU and their self-proclaimed Marxist leader are an absolute disgrace. They are actively indoctrinating kids with their own political ideology of lies and hate in order to deliberately pervert our political democracy. They should be immediately banned. And if I was a teacher, I'd be resigning from such a dangerous organisation. As a parent, if I find my kid with any NEU indoctrinating publicity or any teacher telling them reform is racist, I will be registering it as a hate crime and will expect the police to act. We cannot have such dangerous people involved in education. Jeremy Carl's here. Did you send that text?
Penises. A woman can't have a penis. A victory for common bleeding sense. Amazing, the Supreme Court today.
It is absolutely amazing. Can I just bring you this, by the way?
Yes.
We've just got a texting that is relevant to you. Is it the first one up there?
This is well organised.
From David, who says, I have landed in a weird place. A one-in, one-out immigration swap with France for some unknown reason. Actual Supreme judges ruling on what a woman is. Pretend pirates being teaching assistants. Gender certificates. Blast furnaces when we don't have coal. And now a debate on whether some so-called celebrity got shot up into the sky or not. I'm as confused as Jeremy Kyle these days, says David.
I'm very confused. But
it is confusing.
Trans activists and allies have responded to the Supreme Court. They've criticised today's evil Supreme Court decision, ruling on the definition of a woman, accusing lawmakers of attacking minority groups and putting them at risk and setting the community back 20 years. A woman, right, can't have a penis. It's done. Finito. Yeah. Common sense. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, they couldn't have been clearer, and a 9-year-old could have made this ruling because it's quite easy to understand.
I don't understand. I genuinely, people think I'm beginning to implode. I don't understand what's happened to common sense in this country. I genuinely, I mean, a teacher union. I think we should concern ourselves with how kids are being indoctrinated in schools. I really do.
Yeah.
That interview with Kemi Badenoch, which has been doing Planet of the Week, the way the BBC treated her. I'm not a fan of Kemi Badenoch, but there's an absolute agenda.
Have you watched Adolescence yet?
No, I haven't.
You know, it was that, wasn't it?
It's not a documentary, Charlie State. It's a Netflix film, and I thought she actually performed very well and kept very cool. But we seem to be in a world where priorities, in my humble opinion, are wrong. We don't seem to be talking about the things that matter.
Yeah.
That terrorist in jail with access to cooking oil and stuff. Sod the victims. What about the victims?
Well, you'd think.